Am I on? Okay, ooh, I'm definitely on now. Okay, good evening again. It is now 6 o'clock. Welcome to the Town Council Business Meeting. That's gonna not work. Try now. Okay, that's better? Yeah, okay. I'm calling this meeting to order, so please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we're doing great so far.
At least have the lid on it.
Before I call on our town manager, Reagan Parsons, there is just a couple things. Housekeeping. There is no sign-up sheet, so it's just going to be, get up and speak. We're doing really well up here. And please note, we are going to, I just want to restate what is written on the public comments form. If you have a public comments, we are doing those again in the beginning. Again, it's a 3-minute deal. But if you want to share with us something that is on the agenda, please wait until the hearing is brought up, because you might learn something from the hearing, and then you might have your question answered. So with that being said, I'm going to turn that over to Reagan Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just very quickly regarding your agenda this evening, I will point out that relative to items 5B and 5C, those are public hearings, but we are not asking for any form of action following the close of those hearings this evening. Item B, you'll actually take up again for action under action items in 6, and then item C, of course, is just the first of 2 budget hearings prior to adoption in June. So it's a little bit unusual. Generally, your public hearings are around zoning matters that you do act on in the same evening. So I just wanted to point out that B and C will not require immediate action following the close of those hearings. Your action items this evening for vote include a couple of architectural reviews that you looked at last week at the agenda meeting, in addition to the issue of your charter change around elections that you held a public hearing on last month. And then the first of what will be required to be 2 votes should you actually implement a municipal service district. And we'll be talking about the details of that a little bit more under the public hearing. But those are your 4 items for direct action and individual vote this evening. And then you'll have your consent agenda, where you have the approval of a condemnation of an unsafe structure, the donation of a playground that is being removed at Elizabeth Rounds Park to a 501c3 organization, some town council minutes for adoption, a resolution agreeing to consolidate the water system serving the current Carolina development, also known in its current form as Carapines, and then finally to approve a budget amendment to move forward with the PD Pennsylvania Road water line replacement. And that will be your consent agenda and subject to singular vote of the council. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to the mayor to proceed with the public hearings, or to proceed with public comments.
Any questions for Reagan? All right. Public comments, remember, it's 3 minutes, so I guess raise your hand or stand up. We haven't figured this out yet, because if anyone wants to say something publicly, this is their chance. Okay?
I will. My name's Deb Lawson.
And if you'll state your name and address, please.
My name is Deb Lawson.
I don't think that's on either.
My name's Deb Lawson, and I live at 205 Pine Needles Lane in Southern Pines, and I'm speaking on behalf of St. John Paul School and its history. Catholic education has a very long history in Moore County. As many of you know, this very room was the auditorium for the first Catholic school for African Americans in Moore County. It was a school opened by the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, and it was open to serve the African American community and its children. The year was 1942. There were few educational opportunities for those underserved at this time, and the sisters ran the school in this very building until 1961. In 1961, Bishop Waters mandated that St. Anthony's School, downtown Southern Pines, and Our Lady of Victory, this school, be integrated. This was 10 years before North Carolina fully desegregated the public education system. I'm sure everybody's seen pictures of this school. In the late 70s, the Catholic Church conveyed this building and the Coalition for Human Care, which was the Our Lady of Victory Catholic Church, to the town of Southern Pines, with the condition that this building, that building, and this block be used to benefit the African-American community. It certainly is. This is a community center. We have the Coalition for Human Care. In the 70s, St. Anthony's School closed and reopened again in 2001 when I became involved. I was asked by Monsignor Ingham to go and find a piece of property for the future school and perhaps the future church. As I was a real estate agent. Immediately, I went to the old zoning book. Still have that book. It is dusty. The zoning was written in 1989 and updated again in 1996. Again, this was 2001. I have a copy, and I don't know if the members would like to see the zoning at the time. Does everybody have that, or?
You can give it to BJ, but your 3 minutes are
Okay.
drawing nigh.
Can somebody defer their time to me who was planning on
It's,
speaking?
no, it's a 3-minute deal.
Churches, synagogues, temples, including associated residential structures for religious personnel and associated buildings including school buildings, zoned rural estate. That is what we did. We built a chapel, first thing in the 6,000 square foot house. And then we proceeded to build our school.
I'm sorry, but your time is up. Thank you. Next. Thank you, Deb.
This is for you. This is special for you.
Are you speaking?
Yeah. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Suzanne Coleman, and I live at 225 North May. Ms. Haney, I was wondering if you could read the black block, what's in the black block on our town newsletter that is in the water bill.
That's going to take up all your time. You do know that.
I'm just saying, do you think you can read it?
Yeah, I do know how to read, Suzanne.
No, not how to read. The font size is so small, I'm
That's-
appealing to the town to please improve that.
Okay, you don't really want me to read it.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay.
I'm here tonight to speak to the issue of the UDO 3.7.1, which the council recommended that it be brought forward as a remedy to allow more control over these large-scale developments. And so that was very encouraging first step. And when I went back and I looked at the UDO, there is a section, and you have it in front of you, under Plan Development 2.184, which is the conceptual development plan, that I'd like to ask the town to clarify at some point, because under 2.18.4, B, it says, a conceptual development plan shall be required when an applicant is planning to develop less than the entire contiguous land area. So I'm wondering if someone could come forward who is not developing less than, and then not be required to present a conceptual development plan, which would remove that legislative opportunity for the council. So I'm just going to leave you with that document and see if the town
Okay.
staff could take a look at it. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. All right, anyone else? Okay,
Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you. I'll be very brief. At your
Name
April.
and address,
Oh, I'm
Adam.
sorry, I'm Adam Kiker. I live at 170 East Illinois in downtown Southern Pines. At your April meeting, there was a lot of discussion in the public comment period about concerns over multifamily developments and the impact on the community. And it sounds like that's a topic of concern to council, which I fully respect. The only reason I wanted to speak tonight was just to ask, I feel like just kind of understanding the community, this has become a pretty interesting place to live and attractive to a lot of people. And I would just ask, as you're considering this, it feels to me that decreasing the supply of housing probably won't change the excitement and energy of the community, and which won't change necessarily the demand for housing. So as you're considering whether more multifamily or single family or whatever is appropriate for the community, just understanding the demand and the interest in living here and the impact that could have on housing prices. As we are hiring people to come work for us and to come live here, and we're certainly not unique, a lot of the major employers in town have this trouble. Finding a place for people to live in town has become challenging. And for our case, these are generally college-educated people we are excited about them moving to our community. And for them to have a hard time finding a place to live is tough. So I would just invite you to keep that in mind as you're considering the pathway for the town relative to single and multifamily. So that's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adam. That's okay. This is not against your time, Dot.
Hi, I'm Dot Greenleaf, and I've lived in the horse country for
Can you give your address, please, Dot?
357 Old Dewberry Lane. And I've lived in the horse country for 44 years. Jenny Moss was a close friend. Dave Kelly was a friend. And this land that you're talking about next door was Dave Kelly's. Yeah, I'm gonna turn that off. And I gather you're talking about the Pine Barrens being a horse country property. I think there's only one horse over there right now. The horse country that Jenny Moss put together was always open to all horse and riders. No gates. Everybody was allowed. Apparently Pine Barrens, I think it does not allow everybody else here. It's just for them. Now they're trying to take away property that has been owned for some time from the Catholic Church because they have a horse over there. I don't quite understand it. I live down the street in horse country from a church, maybe 3 houses away, and they never bothered a horse. Never. The worshipers or whomever never did bother horses. I've ridden all my life also, and I can't imagine how this could worry anybody.
Okay.
I mean, unless you can't ride at all, I think that you should be able to live beside a church.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? We're really trying, if you're dealing with something that we're going to talk about, as in the Catholic Church and the horse, if you can just wait until the presentation. If it's something else, we'd like to hear what you have to say.
My name is Bill Bissett. I live at 355 Pine Barrens Vista. We have 21 acres over here. You say there's only one horse there. It's still horse country, and the whole area out there is horse country. People move out there just for that reason, to have the openness in the area. If this was a supermarket or anything else, everybody would shut it down immediately. But it's a business. It's a church. It's a business. It's one of the largest businesses in the world. And it's going to do the same thing any supermarket or anything else does. They're going to pile in the parking and pile in the lights and pile in the traffic. We've already okayed a 300 house development across the street from us You have two schools, one, this Catholic school, and one down the street from the elementary school, on a little bitty road that's out in the country from town. And I guess you didn't want this in town, but the whole reason of this for people out there is for the area and the quietness. Now you're just developing what we went out there for, and everybody else is out there for, is some peace and quiet. The traffic alone is getting bad. Let's throw in a 1,000 parking spot church and all the events from church and everything else going up and down that little bitty road. And all the little access roads, there are only 2 lanes. There's no room to make this a lot bigger unless you're gonna start carving into the sides. Planning board has always voted this down. There's no reason to continue this. They've got their school, let them have their school, but don't let a mammoth church come in here with some real big ideas on what they want to do. There's other places to put it. They're gonna have the school there. And they say they have a church there already. It's a house that someone pulled a string on to make a church. That's kind of a false narrative. They don't have services there. They don't have tons of things going on there. So please, let's call it what it is.
Okay.
This is horse country. This is country. This isn't a city. This is the outskirts of Southern Pines. Let's not wreck it. Let's just put this place somewhere else. The planning board's always voted it down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said, if you're dealing with something that we have on our agenda, please do not do public comments. Wait until that time after they've already expressed themselves on the public hearing. Any other public comments?
My name is Susan Ward, and my home is located at 575 Clark Street. These are my opinions on my observations of the town council the past 6+ months. I am appalled by the short-sightedness of the council as to the development of Southern Pines. Being a visual person and one who aims for the big picture, I want to see a mock-up of what the town will look like when all the approved developments are built. I get the impression the council has no idea. Just clear another space, build more commercial spaces or apartments, create more traffic, and watch the historic, charming town, not city, of Southern Pines disappear. There has been discussion using the word gateway into neighborhoods. A gateway is like the curb appeal of a house. Show me how a multi-story apartment building or commercial buildings with parking lots create an appealing entrance to an historic residential neighborhood. Walkable? Yes, in the historic downtown area. Would I be walking to the proposed Walgreens, Target, or even the Y? No. 15501 is congested with, Morganton Road, is congested with vehicular traffic now and merging lanes. So what will the future hold? Oh, we'll fix the roads and put in stoplights, crosswalks, sidewalks, you say. How does that create curb appeal or a gateway into a neighborhood or the downtown area? Logical public transportation needs to be offered throughout Southern Pines. Regular stops, reasonable or free fares on a schedule need to be offered. The paperwork for the current service offered through Moore County is extensive and requires hours of wait time on either side of transportation needs. I was recently in Cary meeting a minor unaccompanied grandchild at the train station. Cary, built by lumbermen around the junction of the railroad in 1854, once had a population of 3,000, now around 174,000. I traveled through the historic neighborhoods in bumper-to-bumper traffic with stoplights every couple of blocks. Did I look at the charming houses or take in the history? No, I was too busy watching traffic ahead. Is this what is wanted for Southern Pines? Take a breath, slow down the development. Look ahead and make wise decisions. I want more from my council members than ribbon cutting and award presentations. I want council members who have done their homework and their research. I want hard questions asked of developers and requirements to invest in our town. The burden of community sustenance is on the shoulders of the residents, while developers clear our trees, clog our streets, overwhelm our infrastructure, and laugh all the way to the bank. Thank you.
Anyone else?
say hopefully I'm the last one, but I doubt it. My name is Felicia Winfield, and I live at 1760 West New York. In March 2020, DFI was engaged to support the town in its efforts to revitalize West Southern Pines. At that time, there was a task force, which has now since been disbanded, but they were tasked with 4 steps: to engage West Southern Pines community to identify public interest, recommending strategies to realize public interest through development, prioritizing development opportunities, and identify those next steps. With 3 opportunities for the community at large, engaging in public input sessions, which we have recently had, some of the takeaways that were noted. Regarding economic development, redevelopment of vacant commercial spaces, which is what the Morganton Road project would seem to do with local businesses. New development and/or redevelopment should be appropriately tailored in such a way in keeping with the existing neighborhood character to include minimizing displacement. My hope is that the council, when furthering this project, that they keep this in consideration. On the commercial development, there needs to be reinvestment along with the redevelopment. There needs to be a way to bring revenue back into West Southern Pines as a reinvestment. This is the only way that keeps the community vital without sacrificing it at the hands of those who don't see its value. Community development and neighborhood reinvestment is not a years-long process, it's a decades-long process. And it took decades for we as West Southern Pines citizens and residents to get to this point where we feel like it's important that the council understand its reinvestment into this redevelopment. Do not short us as residents of West Southern Pines for the sake of having something developed that would not benefit us. My consideration would be that there would be more thought in this process, and that you keep in mind, again, West Southern Pines' history and the legacy that we have been mandated to carry as its citizens into this new project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. With that being said, you're now going on to PD 0422. This is the St. John Paul CDP. This is a continued hearing from last month's meeting. And I think we heard from the church last time, and I think it's, I don't mean the other side, but I guess that's what it is. Now we'll hear from the people representing the opposition. Yes? I don't have any, I don't know. Oh, if you'll state your name and address too, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Peter Longenbaugh. My wife's name is Corinne, and I live at 290 Pine Barrens Vista in Southern Pines. It was about 22 years ago that my wife and I moved from Southern California, myself being a recent, completely retired lawyer, and my wife a designer. Our goal was to come here as senior citizens and retire. I was going to play golf, a lot of golf, and my wife was going to ride horses and fox hunt. It was a tough question. Were we going to find the golf course where we could build and live, where I could walk to the clubhouse? Or was she going to have her horse property with her barn, and I was going to drive to the golf course? We found Pine Barrens. It was almost like a blessing. It was out of the way, it was in the country, nothing like Southern California, it was really in the country. And we checked the zoning and the variances, and we purchased 10 acres in Pine Barrens. We arrived with 2 horses, a horse trailer, and we built a house. We built a barn. And my wife began fox hunting. 1 day a week, 2 days a week, sometimes 3 days a week. I drove to the golf course, which was fine. There's plenty of golf proximate to Pine Barrens. At that time, and this was 22 years ago, we certainly got the feeling that Southern Pines was behind Pine Barrens, was behind what we were doing, what we were building, and what we had built at Pine Barrens. They sent out a photographer. They took pictures. They interviewed my wife, they being the magazine, the newspaper, a very flattering article about my wife. And they put it on the cover of the magazine 22 years ago and referred to it as New Horse Country. Probably some or all of you know that Pine Barrens was originally the Dave Kelly Horse Farm. And we've learned, since we've lived there for 22 years, that it was famous. This is where people came from New York, and they stopped. They stopped to have their horses trained, to rest their horses on their way to Florida or points south. We still see people coming and saying, well, the horse farm has changed, but Pine Barrens is beautiful. I don't know exactly, because I don't know the lady, where she was going with the comments about Catholic school, but I'll just throw out, I'm Catholic school, 1 through 12.
I only got 3 minutes, you got more time, that's why I couldn't go there.
I'm sorry.
Let's not do that, please. Go ahead, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you. My wife is Catholic school, 1 through 12 in France. What we are concerned about at Pine Barrens is a 18,000 square foot church next to our beautiful development and all the attendant problems that it not only can but will cause. And then there's a 7,800 square foot, I guess it's called an administration building. And then the parking lot, and 500 or how many exact parking spaces you determine. Again, all the attendant problems. That part of the development, that part of the request by the Catholic Church doesn't conform with the comprehensive plan. And it's certainly not compatible with Pine Barrens. I went back and looked, I guess in preparation for the meeting with the planning board, and looked at the comprehensive plan. It was, in my opinion, an impressive document. I think it was 2016. And one theme that we see in that document that the church is asking you to greatly deviate from was the theme. Over and over in that document, we see the language that they, Southern Pines, wants to retain the aesthetic and functional characteristics of horse country. Horse country. And again, we see in the document, open space areas like those in horse country is something the land use strategies in the plan aim to preserve. I, as a resident, am asking the council to deny the request of the church, or at a minimum, give the church the school, as long as it's made very clear for this generation, for the members of Pine Barrens, that there's not going to be a high school. We've gone from a grade school to a middle school. There is not going to be a high school that they are going to get. And I'm asking personally, and for my wife, that the request to do the attendant church, the 18,000 square foot church on that property next to Pine Barrens and the parking lot, that part of the request be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say on that side? Is there going to be a formal presentation or not on your side? Do you know? There is? Okay, just thought that's what we had continued for you, and that was the question. And let me ask one question. Is there a way we can turn these fans down? Somebody? Okay, if you can, fine. If not, sorry.
That's all right.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
My name is Lloyd Sullivan. I live at 225 Pine Barrens, adjacent to the applicant proposed rezoning request. I grew up in Southern Pines and I've lived here most of my life. I spent a great deal of time looking for equestrian property to build my home. I grew up on a horse farm with the scarcity at that time of horse property, I was fortunate to find Pine Barrens. It met all the requirements for horse community that is adjacent to existing zone horse farm now owned by the diocese. I never envisioned that two huge buildings, parking lots, sports fields, traffic, which bring noise and light pollution to our peaceful community would ever be considered on the property that is existing horse farm. It is my understanding that the school was only allowed elementary grades and now has a middle school. The planned use that the Catholic Church has proposed for the horse farm that they purchased is not compatible with adjacent residential equestrian properties. The horse community has meant so much to this area. It brings recognition, world-class equestrians, and positive economic impact. I ask that you vote no on the applicant's request to rezone. I've got some pictures, but I'm gonna make this quick because I know that Andy wants to get up and speak and others. But there's several things that have been testified in the planning and the last meeting. Ms. Lawson, if I understand, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she said the Monsignor called her and asked her to find some land. It was previously stated by the church that the town asked them to go out and find land. Now that's kind of conflicting to me. I don't know who asked who now to go out and find land.
Answer to that?
Go right ahead.
Monsignor asked me as a real estate agent to find some land. I went over to the town offices and met with the planning director at the time, and he told me that you needed to take your school out of town to the ETJ in the correct zoning, which was rural estate. I did that in 2001. I brought it back to him. It was right in front of Belmead, which was zoned facilities and recreation or
Okay.
something. And so I did exactly as the town had asked me at the time, because they did not want any more schools or churches in downtown business area.
Okay. The other thing, I appreciate the history and not be argumentative about the building. I think it's a phenomenal thing, but the point I'm trying to make is every church in this town can give you history of how they impacted Southern Pines. So the other thing is, no one from the Catholic Church has any dollars invested in the land that they're proposing to change. But we do have, basically some of us, our life savings invested in this land next to them. I'm going to hand y'all some pictures in just a minute, and I just want to. The other thing is, nobody from the church has even knocked on my door and said, hey, can we sit down and talk about this? But yet they tell us they want to be good community individuals. So anyway, the other thing is you have to apologize. I miscounted, I only have 6.
That's fine. Thank you.
picture you're looking at is the easement road they've been talking about on the left. The road on the right is my road. It shows you how close it is. To the right of that road is my pond. To the right of that pond is my house. If you look out my front door, their proposal last time they presented anything, their rectory or their house for their pasture is right out my front door. All right, the next picture is the easement. On the right-hand side, you'll see the Curry's property. On the left-hand side is the proposed land we're talking about, the Catholic zone. That is the easement road also. This is the road that they're proposed to use, which will bring a ton of traffic down that little road. Beside, doesn't matter if it's 1 horse or 100 horses. The fact is, we bought out there because it was horse community. The next picture is standing basically to the right is my house, and it's looking from the end, almost at the end of their property toward Camp Easter Road. And that's just half of that 20 acres. You turn to the next one that's the other half, and looking toward Camp Easter Road. You can see, one of the things I want to point out is Mr. Bogle had testified and showed an overview, and it looked like that there was a lot of trees on that property. There's not a lot of trees on that property, so there's almost no barrier whatsoever. If anything was approved for them, and so that wanted to point that out. The next picture is the barn, existing barn that they had a horse farm on. That they had the horse farm, that's their barn, and they lived above that. That picture was taken standing at my fence, looking up. And the point I want to make is when we turn to the next page is that to the right of that barn is where their proposed administration building is. That administration building is going to be looking right down into my property. Now, is it BJ? Mm-hmm. Yeah. BJ, I think, stated last time that when he scaled it, that it looked like their proposal was 200 feet off. But if you look at their plan, it's on the inside of that barn. And so it's going to be closer to my fence line than what the 200 feet is, because I measured from my fence, which the easement, the road easement is their property, to the corner of their barn, and it's approximately 222 feet. I've heard 200 feet, I've heard 100 feet last time from them, and then there's also been a proposed 150 feet. That would never even come close to being enough. There's a ton of land on the other side of that barn. The next picture is you're coming down, we're inside of Pine Barrens. As you look forward, a little bit to the left of that is where they're proposing the administration building will be, and to the right of that is the church. That's what I'm going to be looking into every day when I come home. The last picture is coming around the curve. You're standing there. The barn is to the left. I'm not standing on my fence. I wanted to show you where my fence was. But you'll be looking up into the administration building, and also to the right will be their church. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Could you tell me your name again, because I did not get it?
Floyd Sullivan.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Andy Pettish, Pettish Law, 127 West Hargett Street in Raleigh. I know that I don't have the privilege of practicing here as often as I'd like, so I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit. I've been practicing land use and zoning law primarily for 15 plus years. I split my practice roughly evenly between adjacent property owners and developers, applicants, property owners themselves, and occasionally I represent local governments and boards as well. So have experience viewpoints from all perspectives within the land use process. I represent Jim and Fran Curry of 141 Pine Barrens Court, Lloyd and Sherry Sullivan, 225 Pine Barrens Court, and Tricia and Bill Bissett of 355 Pine Barrens Court, and have been coordinating with a number of the other Pine Barrens residents as well in this process. I have in addition to the PowerPoint, I have prepared a handout, if I could approach the.
Absolutely.
If I could give one.
Thank you.
I promise that I don't plan to go through this line by line, but I wanted to create a quick reference for the council in this process that blended what the key provisions in both the comprehensive long-range plan and the UDO with respect to this application, as well as some of my analysis and the applicant's responses to certain questions in one place that might be helpful for the council in reviewing this matter. And before I go over that analysis, I'd like to just make a few comments in general about in relation to past proceedings with the planning board and the last hearing before this council. And this has come up again tonight. In past meetings, representatives of the church and school have addressed, if I could perhaps phrase it as a frustration, that they were advised by planning staff of prior staff no longer with the town to try to find space outside of downtown for both the school and the church, I believe. And then that prompted them to go forward and acquire these properties. I think originally 2 parcels where the school and the rectory are, and then later, maybe approximately 10 years later, acquired the western parcel, which is the former horse farm. There have been 2 comprehensive plans since then, since 2001, when they originally acquired the first properties. And those comprehensive plans involved a lot of community input to which the church could have participated and may have participated, but the result was what it was. And I'm certainly sympathetic on some level to individuals. I experience it all the time with clients where they're advised one thing by the staff, and then over time, conditions change, circumstances change, and that no longer is applicable, and they're in a difficult spot. Regardless of the guidance that they received and how well aligned that guidance was to development policies at the time and development policies now, they have to be assessed under the policies and the regulations, the ordinances that apply now. And among those things, the UDO and the CLRP, which I'll probably refer to as a comp plan from now on, so I don't get tongue twisted over that. Under both of those, it's pretty clear that you cannot harm adjacent property owners to solve the church and school issues. And there are issues, especially with the school. It's a non-conforming use right now, and those are disfavored in zoning law, and over time they should be brought into conformity, and this is one way to handle that. Another way would be through a rezoning or continued special use permits issued for the expansion and renovation of the school. But those are messy processes, I mean, at least a special use permit process. So this is one way to do that. But the plan development option here, especially in comparison to the special use permit, I think, as I've observed looking back through some prior minutes, kind of trying to find the history of this, I also noted that there seem to be a number of folks seeking PDs in Southern Pines. There, looking through the Board of Adjustments history, I did not see hardly any special use permit applications. And that is an indication that this PD is being used as an end around for the special use permit process, which has very high standards and I would say, I mean, it's a quasi-judicial proceeding. So they're required to bring in evidence, and the decision has to be based on evidence. Whether that, I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right thing and what should be forced upon the school and the church here, but it should be noted that the PD process should not be easier than the special use process. This is, they're creating their own special ordinance and rules for that property when the amount of time and effort that goes into researching a comprehensive plan and a unified development ordinance, that thinks through all different angles of this, the storm, all the development, the performance standards, et cetera, the compatibility, the transitions, and to kind of put this together in a very short time, these PD applications, and put it through a legislative process. In my experience, often the analysis, the testing that it's given does not rise to the level that I think that it should to match and exceed the effort that went into preparing the UDO. I will just point out that in your UDO, a special use permit requires 4 standards to be met, evidentiary standards to be met. And then if you're expanding a nonconformity, there's an additional 8 general standards that have to be met. And then if your nonconformity is for a non-residential use, which this is, there's an additional 5. And those are quasi-judicial standards that each one has to be supported by competent material, substantial evidence in the record. It's a tall order, but I would submit that the PD process should not be easier than that. Another issue that's come up repeatedly here is a question of whether the Pine Barrens community is horse country. And, all right. That actually worked. Thank you very much, Mr. Grieve. And this is something that I came into this with only a week or so before the planning board meeting. It's a lot of information to try to digest, and I was not completely up to speed. I thought, looking at a number of things, that this would qualify as horse country. But technically, I saw this heading into the last meeting, under the definition in the comprehensive plan, it's technically not. I agree with the applicant that it's not. However, that does not mean that you just throw out and disregard the idea that this is that the future land use map establishes this as residential estate. I'm going to get these mixed up probably. And that the UDO has designated these districts to be residential equestrian, rural equestrian. They both recognize that this is a special place for people that have horses. And whether only one person has a horse in Pine Barrens right now, or all the people have horses, what the policy says is that this is a place for horse people to go. And that is something that makes this land valuable in its location, the size of these lots. And if you compromise the appropriateness of these properties for horses, then the value of that is going to drop. That when you have a niche market, that's something that has a value all of its own. And so there's a concern there from that standpoint. But on a larger perspective, it's not about who has a horse and who doesn't have a horse. It's about what the zoning is, what the future land use map says about what this land should be used for. And anybody going in next to it needs to be cognizant of that in their planning. And I'm not here to take a position as to whether it's impossible to figure out a way to have these uses operate compatibly next to each other. But I am going to argue before you tonight that what the current status of this is, and even with updates, and I do not believe that they've accomplished that at this time. This was brought up recently tonight, and I will just make a quick note of it, that although there is no inclusion of a high school in the application in the uses that they've proposed, there is on their application itself a section at the end here where they've included educational high school as a potential future use. And I think that becomes concerning, that once if this is allowed, then in the future, they'll come back to potentially a different council and try to add in the high school. And I would just ask that it be, as this, a pin put in that, and depending on how this unfolds, that it be made clear within any approval that a high school would not be allowed here in the future. And they may not have any intention to do that. I don't want to, but it was in the application. The photos last time that Mr. Bogle provided, that is there any way to put that was in a different aspect ratio? Is that just what it comes up as?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I didn't know if there was, but I'm sure it's fine. If I could approach. There we go.
You want me to try to rotate it?
No, I think it's rotated. I just felt like the aspect ratio wasn't, but it's fine. Thank you. Oh, you could, yeah, it seems to be.
Yeah, it's not oriented correctly. I can go ahead. All right. Holy cow. Oh, we'll get it to work.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Who put this together?
Somebody's getting fired tomorrow. I just wanted to point out, one, that this western parcel here is where the church and now potential athletic field is, on their most recent plan, is going to the parking areas will be placed primarily. There were indications, I'm not going to speak, that Mr. Bogle said he located his Volvo up here, and that the grade from the easement drive there was a natural stream from the grade of the land that was going to conceal the parking area. I would point out that this is 430 feet, this topo line here. The high point, 434 here, so this is part of the 26, but this is this section, the high point that slopes down and over here. Basically, I was going to run into this pond here on the Sullivan property.
Sioux Nation wants to hear.
The Sullivan's home is approximately there. It wasn't on the buildings yet on GIS. The Curry's home is here, and their stable and riding area is run by the larger block. Adam Kiker's property here, I believe he's building somewhere in the center of this. Mr. Mace, his home here is at about 452, which is significantly above the 430. Doesn't even account for the height of the homes. The Longenbach's 436, so they're level. So it's not that this property is just, the slope of this is just naturally going to screen off this parking area. And in addition, there's none of that occurs between the Curry property and the front portion of this part of the western parcel that would be developed with a church and potentially athletic field. Here you can see the horse facilities and the Curry's home, and up here is Mr. Sullivan, the Sullivan's home, and Mr. Mace's home there, and where they propose this. So the view shed, I don't believe is fully protected simply by the contours of the land. The issue of civic uses came up, and I don't want to linger on this very long. I just want to point out that I disagree with Mr. Bogle's interpretation of this, where the references to institutional buildings subsume somehow the idea of civic, that those things collapse together. All the references that I see are made to civic and institutional buildings, meaning those two things are different. And there is a reference here to the UDO's use table, and indicating that it is also that somehow is additional support, but the use table only references institutions, not civic. There's nothing that says civic in the UDO section related to uses that I could find. So I would submit the evidence presented here to support the argument that the church is civic use actually cuts the other way, and more rather supports the idea that civic and institutional are separate things as contemplated by the comp plan and UDO, and that at least while there are some differences as to how that word civic is used and what it encompasses, the way that your documents use it, I don't find any support for it to include religious institutions. Scale was also brought up. That typically references dimensional size of buildings, but it can also include the intensity of a use. But most often it's talking about the built environment around. That was a question. And then there was also discussion about the uses that surround the Pine Barrens property, and that there's some industrial zoning over there. There's some neighborhood business. Some of that's in the future land use map is set up as as commercial, et cetera. My understanding is that everyone that has purchased property on that side, those uses existed. They bought with knowledge that they were there, what they were getting into, as opposed to somebody on the other side, the Sullivans and the Currys, now who bought adjacent to rural estate, and now are finding that it wants to be used, turned into something that I think we can have some debate over what level of intensity of a large church, a large religious institution equals. But in some ways, it is comparable to commercial use, and some churches are more active than others about, what amenities and programs that they provide. So it can certainly be more than just a Sunday morning, high point of activity, not to mention the various activities of the school. So I would jump now into looking over the analysis document that I provided you. The CDP really calls for a bifurcated, I don't think it does this necessarily expressly, but in looking at it, it calls for a bifurcated review. At one level, you have to look at the high-level policy issues and see if those are met. And then if they are, you look more closely at the development details because, and it says in the absence of anything different within the PD application, the UDO minimums apply. I would submit that, especially in sensitive circumstances, what those minimums within the UDO and development performance standards are not sufficient. And so there needs to be additional protections provided. And I think one area where I think that while there may be some tweaks that could be made, and we want to look at it a little closer, the lighting is one area that I've seen comparisons to other projects. The lighting here, their attention to the impacts of light pollution is pretty high. And I like a lot of the things that they've done. Some tweaks could be made, but I just want to bring attention to an area where I think it's done well. The buffers and setbacks is a huge problem here, and that's no surprise to anybody. Access and traffic, the key access issue is along that easement that runs right along the Curry and Sullivan property lines going up to the Currys, and potential use of that, I think, is problematic. Larger traffic issues. I will say this, the applicant has been correct in that a TIA, a traffic impact analysis, is not required at this stage as part of the approval process. But the applicant does have the burden of proof and production here. The onus is upon them to establish that they've met to give you the right information to be able to make your judgments, your conclusions about the different criteria that the UDO sets out that you have to at least consider in making your decision. And that's the difference between this legislative decision and a quasi-judicial one, whereas you'd have to reach a conclusion in a quasi-judicial matter that criteria has been met, it's been satisfied. In a legislative matter, what the UDO prescribes, because it used must and shall language all through there, but what it's saying is what you have to do is at least consider this factor and weigh it in all the other ones. But you got to look at this, and you got to look at it closely. And that's where I think when those criteria mention things like traffic, and the applicant has not gone ahead and prepared a traffic impact analysis that takes into account both the existing traffic now, what will be added by additional developments coming online over the course of this project, what is added with their particular project over time, and the ambient increase of traffic. And these are all things that traffic engineers would kind of a standard approach to doing this. So you just don't have that information. It's not required, they don't have to do it, but you don't have to approve their application either. So turning now to the analysis that I provided on the page 2, the first page, really. I provided a legend there. What I've done is provided anywhere it's black or red, that's the black letter language of the UDO or CLRP. The red just is highlighting a section of that to draw your attention to it. Green, anything that's in green is a verbatim response that I've taken from the application by the applicant, and then anything in blue are my comments in relation to that. So starting point here is the UDO itself under plan development and the stage that we're at here, the conceptual development plan. There are a number of, I believe there's 4 total criteria, but there's some subsets within it. The first one is that the proposed PDD satisfies the criteria for a zoning map amendment established in this chapter. The zoning map amendment criteria is under 2.17.9, and there are a number of these here. The first one starts off with the rezoning shall be consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. I'll address that in a moment, so just to move past that. The very second one, adverse impacts on neighboring lands. The hearing body shall consider the nature and degree of adverse impact upon the neighboring lands. Lots shall not be rezoned in a way that is substantially inconsistent with the uses of the surrounding area, whether more or less restrictive. I've got the applicant's response there, and I do want to, I guess, pause here for a second and say, and Mr. Bogle or Mr. Grieve can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but from what I've seen at the successive stages, the application itself, especially the section where they address these points, has not changed. It's been this exact same language all the way through. And there's a number of representations that are made here, and the presentations were covering a lot of area, but what you're judging is the application. That's what's going to be approved ultimately. And I don't mean that it can't be supplemented, but I don't think that there's been a formal amended application. You, okay, and did it change any of these, the language in any of these responses?
Everything that was changed is highlighted in red, or red strike-throughs and highlighted.
Okay, well, if you think that I've addressed anything here that has been modified, please just interrupt. I don't want to make any representations that aren't accurate. So I will just note here that with respect to the adverse impacts, their response ignores the impacts of the church development entirely, the athletics fields, the access easement, the parking lot. The response also fails to consider the character and use of the adjoining properties here to the west, and maybe more than that, but certainly to the west, to the Pine Barrens folks. On page 4, under public policy, it states that certain public policies in favor of the rezoning may be considered, and then it goes on to make some suggestions. Here, the applicant didn't identify any specific public policies in favor of the church development, and just made some general references to why the school is good, but again, no specific plans or policies are referenced here as to why this PDD is justified. I'll just note that under G, there was an opportunity to address other factors not listed, and their response was none submitted. Under H, the applicant's representations, it states at the bottom here that the hearing body shall consider whether the entire range of permitted uses in the requested classification is more appropriate than the range of uses in the existing classification. This is something that was raised at the end of the last meeting when a list of things that were permitted by right and by condition were gone through for the RE district. I will note here that their response indicated that the PD district does not increase the range of permitted uses on the site. I don't believe that that's accurate because the PD would allow a religious institution in excess of 250 seats, which is not, that is in and of itself a primary use, and that's not currently operating on that site right now. The size of the rectory is probably under 50 seats, I feel confident. And then also, there was no comparison made within the application. There was discussion of it that occurred. Just reference there to whether that's a civic institutional use. But I added, this was a slide of Mr. Vogel's. I added the part with the gray background. These are the uses that they've included in their application. The private school, pre-K through 8th grade. Another thing, it's not, middle schools are not allowed under any circumstances in RE. So that wouldn't be accurate either. And then religious institution, although it is operating there, but it's not, it's nonconformity. Then the religious institution, large church. With respect to all of these other items, I think Mr. Van Camp indicated that many of them were not likely to occur there because it's a church's own property and they wouldn't want many of them to occur next to the school. Anyway, in addition, I believe that the value of that land is no longer likely agricultural, at least for the church, wanting to have a return on their investment if they weren't able to utilize it. So I find it unlikely that they would sell it for some of these other uses because it just wouldn't mandate the price. It becomes financially infeasible if the cost of the land is too much to operate herding sheep and goats. And in addition, I would just go out on a limb and say that the town itself likely would not place a fire station or police station, et cetera, in that location. So I think net on this particular point, weighing whether the proposed set of uses permitted uses versus what could happen there doesn't weigh so heavily in favor of this PD as it made it sound at the last meeting, putting in a church that not only is proposed to be in excess of 250 seats, but actually, I believe 1,200 seats is the number. That is a substantial increase in intensity of the use on this property. The second criteria for a conceptual development plan in the PD application requires that the CDP represent an overall development pattern that is consistent with the goals and policies of the comp plan, the official zoning map. This is on page 5 of my handout. Capital improvements program and any other planning documents adopted by the town. I'm not aware of any other documents that would be applicable to this, but if there are any, they would need to be addressed. There is the applicant's response here. There's 4 points, A through D. I would submit that those are all conclusory responses that don't really provide any substantive explanation or justification. They are just, it will be what it's supposed to be. And that's not sufficient in terms of responding to that question. The official zoning map reference here, I'm unclear, and perhaps Mr. Grieve can clarify whether the official zoning map here references the current zoning map or the future land use map. I assume it is the future land use map, but it's unclear what that is referencing. I would simply say that to the extent it's the future land use map, that area is designated as residential. As this has been discussed a number of times, the items there that are encouraged to be done there through a rezoning process, which the PD essentially is elementary schools and civic uses. Most of the attention has gone to the civic use question. I think what has been missed here is that they're incorporating a middle school within this, and that is absolutely, under any interpretation of this, not consistent with what the comprehensive plan advises. I believe that this next section, number 3, the question of whether development is appropriate for the area in which the town is located. There's been a lot of discussion about this as well, with a lot of the attention falling on the McDeeds Elementary School, which was part of a separate PD. I think that makes it a little difficult to make comparisons because each of these PDs are their own unique things that had a lot of different factors that go into them, and just saying, hey, we're across the street from one doesn't automatically make it appropriate within the context. And again, that's on the south side of the road. With all the attention going over there, it's ignored what's on the north side of the road, and especially the sensitive area, the zone rural estate. I would also note that within their own application, this is the last sentence of the second paragraph that they have, and I've highlighted in my third paragraph at the bottom here. This is under number 3 on page 6. The applicant states that they will care will be taken to assure that the future church is developed with minimal adverse effects to existing residences. Again, that's somewhat subjective, but I would submit that they've made the assertion that they will do this with minimal adverse effects, and I don't believe that that's where we are right now. On page 7, I just included the definition of conventional zone listed within this section on conventional zoning districts. I included the definition essentially of the rural estate zoning district, which is what all of these subject properties are zoned. And again, although this is not technically horse country as it's defined in the comp plan, the purpose of the RE district is established as a district in which the principal use of land is for low-density residential purposes, which in and of itself is important with relation to the scale of intensity and use that's being proposed here adjacent to it, but also for horse farms, horse stables, and related activity purposes. The regulations of this district are intended to preserve the existing scale of low-density residential and preserve existing horse farms. I would submit that the Currys have one of those. And discourage traditional urban development that uses that require major utility extensions and street improvements. While this, I don't know that a large religious institution qualifies as a traditional urban development. It certainly requires those major utility extensions and well, we'll see. We don't have the TIA, so we don't know about the street improvements. The next page, page 8, is the section on planned development districts themselves. I find this very interesting from the standpoint of, is this application even fit within what's allowed for a PD district? The PD district is designed to accommodate mixed land uses such as office, residential, service, commercial, public, or private recreational development. It doesn't talk about civic uses, doesn't talk about educational, doesn't talk about religious institutions. These are all very different from those. To the extent that somebody might argue service, I would say go look through the table of uses. It makes it clear that services mean retail, business services. That's what that's referenced to. Again, here at the end, the regulations of this district are intended to encourage planned large tract development, including service, office, commercial, residential, public, private, recreational, even light industrial uses. On the next page, a PD district is meant to address issues that can't be accomplished through conventional zoning districts. I think a school and a church clearly within the UDO can be accomplished in conventional zoning districts. Then under D, land use mix, each PD district approval shall identify the authorized land uses, which may include a mix of residential, retail, office, recreational, or light industrial uses. Now we're no longer in a legislative area here. We are interpreting the law. And when the law says, this is the UDO, when the law says shall identify the authorized land uses that can happen within the PD, which may include a mix of these items, there's a principle in interpreting ordinances that if you include something and exclude it, other stuff, then that's intentional. And what is excluded here, what it doesn't say is that you can do these other civic items. Maybe they can be done as accessory. Other things have been approved in the past. That's the past. You weren't looking at it from this perspective, but I think that it is at least a question mark about whether the UDO even authorizes this type of development. And it makes sense because when you read the entire PD district description within the UDO, it's talking about trying to put together a variety of uses, mixed use in the traditional sense of residential, retail, office, all of those things. This is a very different proposal that's been brought to you. It's a question that is not clear in my mind, and I am concerned about it just from the legality of it. I also looked closely after this was raised at the last meeting. This is page 10 under religious institutions, section 5.15.2, special requirements for existing religious institutions. I think that, assuming for the sake of argument that the rectory does qualify as a religious institution, and then I don't necessarily disagree with how it was presented by the applicants last time, that they can, by the letter of the law here, expand onto a contiguous property with pretty much unlimited vision for what they want to do, and there will be really poor protections for property owners because you're talking about they would be developing as RE next to RE, and those don't account for a lot of buffering under by right development. I don't believe that this is what this provision was drafted and adopted to accomplish, but by the letter of the law? I think it does. What it does not do, and this is in subsection H on the next page, it does not carry with it any right to develop the school. So while the church could go forward and expand itself, it cannot carry with it as an accessory use the school. H says, except in RR and GB districts, the following activities shall be prohibited in association with religious institutions, retreat centers, overnight lodging facilities, or other temporary sleeping quarters, and any use not specifically identified as an allowable accessory use. I combed the entire UDO to find out if there was any place that identified a school as a permitted accessory use for a church, and it is not expressly stated anywhere. I believe what is meant here is that they're referencing the uses, accessory uses that are, because it goes on to list a number of accessory uses in the following paragraphs. So there, it's clear, if that's what it's referencing, definitely not. I could not find anything in any other place in the UDO, even if you expanded it to include that. So that does leave us in a what I would consider to be a lose-lose scenario in what we're doing here, and what I think supports the idea of attempting to find a solution, a mutually negotiated solution in this process that would allow the PD to go forward. But nonetheless, in the absence of it, we're really only focused on the PD, and whether they can do that by right or not is irrelevant to this application. I do want to just point out, there is a definition in the UDO, and it mirrors closely what's in the comp plan for compatibility, and it's pretty tough. A condition in which a land use or conditions can coexist in relative proximity to each other in a stable fashion over time, such that no use or condition is unduly negatively impacted directly or indirectly by another use or condition. Again, that's the standard that we're looking at the compatibility of this proposal with the Pine Barrens community, in addition to other surrounding properties. Turning to the comprehensive long-range plan, this included a little bit of the introductory material because I think it helps frame the approach, but I'm sure that the council is very familiar with that, so I won't belabor it. I do want to turn to the goals listed within the comp plan and just highlight a few. G1, community well-being, includes the promotion of neighborhoods that are safe, secure, and healthy, and health refers to physical health and mental health. I think that one of the issues that's raised here, and it's been talked about in previous meetings, and I know that Tom Daniel here, a large animal veterinarian that specializes in horses, I think can also speak to this, but there are some significant physical health issues related to somebody who is a horse owner adjacent to this property, and the injuries that can occur when horses are startled by activity nearby. And I don't want to, this is Tom Daniel's territory, I don't want to go into it any further, but I think that that's implicated here. Again, G4, neighborhoods protect and enhance the character of Southern Pines residential neighborhoods. Growth, ensure that services, facilities, land use resources accommodate anticipated growth while still enhancing the quality of life for Southern Pines residents. And I think there's been substantial comments made that are credible that this is going to impact the quality of life for a number of residents. Again, policies here, neighborhoods ensure that new development and redevelopment are compatible with the overall scale of the neighborhood in which it occurs. No matter how much the applicant here wants to focus on the school next door, or to, I believe, the Belle Meade property to the north, or the large PD development going on to the south, the reality is their closest neighbor here is really the Pine Barrens community, folks, and they've been ignored a lot in this process with respect to the application. The future land use map, I did think it was interesting, and this is noted at least in one other place within the comp plan. It points out that I believe this was adopted in 2016, it accounts for growth through 2040. And I know that in a number of the church's representations, they talked about how the area was growing so much and that kind of accounted for a change in conditions that would support this. But that's not what your document says. It says we've looked at this just a few years ago and we've projected out significantly. Maybe, I don't purport to know your community better than anybody in this room, but I'm just pointing out what the document says. With respect to the Chapter 4 land use, it's on page 15 of my handout. Again, this is a reference to this idea that it's addressing growth, both residential and non-residential growth through the year 2040. And it goes on to note that change is a part of all living communities, and this chapter recognizes this fact and establishes a pattern of land uses that accommodates anticipated changes while preserving those essential characteristics that make Southern Pines special. Throughout the comprehensive plan, it refers to the equestrian community as a critical part of Southern Pines on a number of different levels. And so I think that, again, it merits special attention to the relationship between properties that are protected for horses, both in the comprehensive plan, in the UDO, and actually has at least one active horse property on it, which abuts the subject property. Rural equestrian, which is the future land use designation for the Pine Barrens development. There in light green, the orange around it is residential, which is what the subject properties are designated as. So this designation provides large lot residential and equestrian use, and it includes single-family residential, along with those other ancillary uses normally associated with horse farms, the keeping of large animals, or other small agricultural pursuits. So again, whether there's one person there or not, you're talking about the relationship between an area that's been specially designated as to be protective and sensitive of these uses and an adjacent use that wants to come in next to it, which is is designated as residential. Again, that butts us up against this question of, okay, they say elementary schools could be okay here. Does not extend to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and certainly doesn't extend to 9th through 12th. And it also references civic uses, parks, neighborhood scale, commercial, et cetera. I think that the civic use question has been framed enough, and Mr. Grieve, I recall, said, it's handled in different ways in different places, and it's up for the council to decide and interpret. On page 17, establishing compatible uses, transitions between uses, mixed use development at higher intensities, or whether this could be potentially considered infill in this lot between the two. Higher intensities can be detrimental to neighborhood integrity unless buildings and sites are designed so that there are compatible transitions between them. It goes on to say the town will need to ensure that in mixed use and on parcels where land uses are transitioning, the scale, orientation, intensity of buildings, 1,200-seat church, is compatible with adjacent development, and that the higher intensity development sites are designed to minimize negative visual, noise, traffic impacts on neighboring properties. That implicates a litany of issues that still exist within their application. Again, I don't believe that this is satisfied. The final page there, 18, with respect to the comp plan, I did also highlight the compatibility definition there, as well as a few others. And I will just note, I mentioned earlier that the comp plan analysis was part of the UDO criteria for PDs, and here I've listed a few of the responses that the applicant gave and a few comments there. There's, I think, probably the largest one to go into here, and I know that it may not have been addressed in their original application, and Mr. Bogle can correct me if I've gotten this wrong, that nothing has changed in these sections to date. But originally, as I think the council remembers, the design had the church here more towards Camp Easter, and this athletic field, I think, was further back. Now it's been replaced, but the use of an athletic field next to this horse property, active horse property, is problematic, and I don't believe that that's been addressed or updated, how all the potential impacts of noise, et cetera, are going to be addressed through that. And we still have this ingress egress point, which I would submit, regardless of how much it's improved or not, is going to become a popular way of getting out of this property for anybody going west after the service. And so I would expect a lot of movement through here. Just that would be my prediction, but I'm not a traffic engineer. I appreciate your patience as I went through all of that. In closing, I would like to, I guess, focus in on kind of the age-old question that comes up in all of these things is, are we just looking at a not in my backyard scenario? I would say the Currys, they bought property in RE. Ms. Curry has adamantly wanted me to bring up the fact that after they bought their property, but prior to building and doing any development on it, she contacted the school. I believe it was Ms. Lawson. Okay, is it Lawson? Not
Lawson, yes.
Lawson. Okay, and had inquired about the plans. And Ms. Curry is here, and she can say this and correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, Ms. Lawson can share her perspective if she disagrees with anything. And while this does not mean that anybody's held, and Ms. Curry understands this, that things can change, it's not something there was nothing in writing, there's no commitments, and things do change. She did at least inquire about the plans for the school, and it did not include expanding to a high school, or I think placing a church on this property next to hers, that it was going to remain in a very low intensity state, however it was utilized. Again, I only bring that up to the extent that there was some effort made to do some due diligence about what was going on around her property before she put in the infrastructure, built the home, all the horse facilities, et cetera. There was still some risk involved with that, but she was using the property as it was intended. She bought property zoned RE, she used it as RE, and she was adjacent to RE. This development, this proposed church for her represents not only just a change of the view shed, which is a legitimate issue and other concerns, whatever, but there is actually a life or death component to this for her. And while, as I said earlier, there may be a way for us to find an arrangement, some development standards, et cetera, that can resolve this and make this compatible. She is not simply just trying to stop growth next to her for the sake of keeping this, an extension of natural space next to her property. This is not hyperbolic. There are real issues here for her. And so, and I think I've shown that in addition to that, there is a strong basis in policy in this town's own lawfully adopted documents that says that this application, where it stands right now, is not sufficient, should not be approved. So with that, I'll make myself available for any questions that the council may have.
Mr. Pettish, and I think probably Mr. Van Camp. I know that in a court of law, I would not be able to ask you about negotiation, and I'm absolutely not sure whether I can ask you that in the town council meeting. If you are both willing to allow me to ask you that, I would be interested in knowing whether or not there's been appropriate time to negotiate in regards to differences that the two sides see. And you can consult with each other about whether or not you're going to even allow a question about that.
I did, at the planning board meeting, I gave my card to Father Forbes, and I said, it was very contentious. And I said, despite the contention, I just want to let you know, I'm always looking for mutually acceptable solutions, and feel free to reach out. I've not received a contact from, as a result of that, that I'm aware of. I did, after the last meeting, I worked closely with both my client at the time, which was only the Currys, and the neighborhood at large, because in my experience working with neighboring property owners, it's very challenging to organize them. And what I don't want to do is come too early to a developer and give them half-baked positions about what they want. My experience representing developers is they want specific things. What usually neighboring property owners bring them is problems, that things they don't like, and they say, you fix it. What I try to do with my clients who are neighboring property owners is say, here's what would solve it for us. And that takes a lot of work to get to when you don't have an engineer, you don't have an architect, et cetera, and you work on that to be able to provide them with specificity. That took me until early last week to get to that point that I could approach the applicant, and I reached out to Mr. Van Camp. We exchanged calls and emails from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday. We were not able to reach each other until this morning, but we had a very good conversation. But at that point, it appears that it did not give the, even though I did my best, I understand from the developer's standpoint, the church's standpoint, that can feel very rushed and last minute, and that's usually not received well. I did my best to get in front of that, but was not able to. So I appreciate the position that they were feeling, being in a last-minute moment, trying to make a decision about whether to work on the negotiation and potentially try to continue with this. So I'm glad we have an opportunity to come and speak tonight, and we are still open to
May I ask
trying
you a
to have
question?
conversations.
Is there a way that we could give you all more time, we could continue this and you all could work out something? Because it always is better, in my opinion, when the two people work together to come to a common ground instead of us making a decision.
But maybe while Mr. Van Camp is responding, I could take a moment just to speak with my client.
Absolutely.
If I could ask a question real quick, Mr. Pettish, and I ask this because I was asked about the issue specifically after the last hearing, and I went back and referenced the allowable uses, and you've put those in your presentation. But if I understood you correctly, you said there was a map that referenced a potential future high school, or maybe it wasn't a map. Where did you see that in the application? Because I simply don't want to be providing wrong information. I didn't find it specifically, so.
It is, unfortunately, I have not updated my pages to reflect the page numbers in today's, but from the March 22nd, 2022 Planning Board meeting, it would be on page 48. But this is,
You said.
and I'll just be happy to give you my copy of it if I could approach.
Look at it, and then I'll know where I'm looking.
BJ, can you pull
Thank
that
you
up
very
by any
much.
chance?
Second page here, highlighted.
BJ?
Mr. Van Camp, I realize this is completely out of the norm. Are you in a position where your clients would be willing to proceed with negotiations as far as everybody addressing their concerns and trying to reach common ground? Or do you wish that I would not put you on the spot?
It doesn't matter. Let me just,
Can you state your name and
Tom
address?
Van Camp, 1680 Midland Road, attorney for the church, the applicant. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, after the meeting, because I know some of the people that live out there, and I do concur that a resolution is the better approach. I went out and sat with my friend Lloyd Sullivan, and we walked the property, and I listened to his issues and talked to Pete Mace on the phone and listened to his issues. And I talked to Andy finally today, and it was a good conversation. I think, though, from my perspective, and it was what I said before, and I think the reason that this was continued quickly by those opposed, and as Andy just candidly admitted, and I appreciate a lawyer who gets up and says the good and the bad and the ugly, the church, unrelated to this, has a right, as a matter of right, to build a church because there's an existing place of worship, whether you want to call it a church or not, on the premises. And so you're, as he said, the letter of the law says they can do this. But at the same time, you have a neighbor across the way for a long time. And so, you know, there'd be phone calls every 5 minutes to the police because a soccer ball went over the fence or whatever. So why invite that? So after the discussion with Andy, we talked about continuing. I will tell you the concern that I had, or that the church had, was that although Andy could identify to me very articulately the issues, lighting, the buffer, which if Pete speaks tonight, you'll see has an additional 1,600 plants in it to make sure nobody sees the church, the parking lot, or anything else. So I think from the church's perspective, they have really worked hard to come to that middle ground. They cannot, based on an issue with, and I totally respect horses, people that own horses, and how they can be temperamental, but to say that one horse that lives on this property should dictate what happens here, I don't think is an appropriate analysis. So I wanted to hear from Andy more specifically, what about the lighting? What about the buffering? Because I wanted a light at the end of the tunnel. So we even talked about getting a mediator. We talked about dates. I called a local mediator and got some dates. What I need to kind of hear from the other side, for the purposes of the church, is just, are we going to go to mediation and you can't have your soccer field? That's a non-starter. Move your parking lot. That's a non. I mean, so I want to know that this has a chance of success. And so maybe if Andy and I had a little bit more time, and that's just unfortunate, where I could say, okay, I think instead of identifying the issues, how far along, I mean, how entrenched are you in some of these points? I think that we could make more progress. You guys have not heard or seen the latest proposal, which even makes more concessions for those landowners in the buffer zone. So to answer your question, Ms. Peterson, I would be happy to talk with them. I don't know when you take a recess or whatnot, and then talk with Andy and see if something could be workable. I do agree, and I've not been.
Well, also, just as a for instance, we've heard neighbors and their comments. We were just handed 20 pages. It's like drinking from a fire hose, which I do appreciate. I really do. And with that being said, if there's a chance that you all could work something out, I don't think this council would have a problem with us continuing it. I really don't. Number one, we need to continue it to get through all this and to, but if you all can come up with some agreement, it would be so much better than us doing it.
I don't disagree with that. I would respectfully request that we could take a little recess and let he and I talk to see if we feel that we can.
Or come close to an agreement, if that's possible, or tell us it's not possible. We're not afraid of making a decision if that's what we need to do, but I have tremendous respect for everybody in the room. I am not Catholic, but I will tell you that Catholics helped me on the most difficult day of my life, and I'm forever grateful for that. And I also I'm a landowner, and I have deep respect for the many things that make Southern Pines special. And I know that everybody has a very heartfelt concern, and I also know that both of you have a decent legal argument. I get that. So we can go and we can make a decision, and one of you can appeal, and we can really have a big fat mess if we want to do that. But if there is a way to determine, at least down to the points where you want us to step in and make the decision, or make the complete decision, or make minor parts of the decision, then I think that's maybe the better way to go. And I would love for everybody to come at it with a positive attitude. I don't think it helps when you stand up there and say, well, we could put a hog farm there, because clearly the Catholic school is not going to put a hog farm there. So stop with the threats and attempt to mediate.
No one said we could put a hog farm there. We said a
It's-
hog farm is
could
permitted. In
be
other
there,
words.
right.
In other words, there's a
Right.
lot of worse things that could happen, which was not a threat at all. It was just it was reading your ordinance and saying, you know,
To fix that. You're right.
They also said you could have a shooting range. We know that's not going to happen too.
I said that. It wasn't.
Yeah, and I realize that.
But if we can keep it on a positive tone, and if everybody can attempt to mediate as close as you can mediate, or come back and say it's not doable.
And I
And we'll make a
don't
decision.
think giving a 10-minute recess is adequate. I think we need to probably continue it to, but hang on.
I thought I heard Mr. Van Camp indicate that Mr. Vogel has new information. I'd like to hear that
Yes,
since you're
we
here
did.
before
And I
we continue.
do
this.
know that this side has
And
some
they have
other people
folks
to
that are
talk.
here and wanna speak.
Don't you, Dr. Daniel wants to speak also.
I didn't mean to suggest we resolve it in 10 minutes. I
Right.
meant that if we talked enough, and I thought that that was a real potential based on our discussion, then
Oh,
a mediation, yeah.
Understood.
do you want to continue with,
I make a motion that we take a 10-minute break.
well, let's let them finish.
I want to at least report back that my folks would like an opportunity to have meaningful discussions over the next few weeks with the applicant and see what we can accomplish in that time.
That's is the perfect world, okay? We're in the middle of this one. Can we let Dr. Daniel speak? Okay. Please come up and, because the mic needs to capture your voice. State your name and your address.
I'm Father John Forbes. I'm at 300 Dundee Road. The concern I think we have is that our attorney represents a small group of people in Pine Barrens. And so we may get buy-in from those people, but there are other people that don't agree either. And I don't know how we are going to have a mediation between us and them when we don't know who they are. It was said earlier that we haven't reached out to people. We had a meeting at the church, at the Legacy Center, which is right next to Pine Barrens. We invited people to come and talk to us. We made our presentation to them, and we revised things based on that. So it isn't true that we haven't been listening. The problem is that how do we know that even if we go to mediation with 4 families who are close neighbors, that will satisfy the people in Pine Barrens, the people across the street, the people. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's my concern, is how, if I knew who the people were we were mediating with and who we were, we might be able to talk about those things, but my
He
concern
represents
is-
3 families, obviously, according to
But
this.
is that big enough? I think there are a lot of other people here that want to speak, and they're beyond those 3 families. So how do we know we're going to include them in the mediation to be able to address their concerns? That's all I wanted to say. That's my concern.
Okay. Bill?
I was just going to ask Andy, you made a comment which indicated to me it's a slow process to figure out who you do represent, and you felt like you'd gotten there with more folks. Is it just those 3 families, or is it a consensus of the neighborhood? What's your understanding?
And I will certainly address Father Forbes' concerns with Tom Van Camp if we have a chance to speak about this in a moment. I think his concerns are very fair, comes up a lot in these discussions, and I have factored that in to the approach and making this overture to them about this. But I can say that I am coordinating closely with a number of other residents within Pine Barrens, and my experience has been if the most vocal and most affected members of a community come to an agreement with a developer, that usually gives the council sufficient comfort to support an application. I cannot speak for anything that this council will do currently, but that's been my experience. So I hope to some degree that can assuage your concerns about that point.
And two of your three folks were the most contiguous, the ones right most
That's correct.
closely.
There really, I think, the Cummings may share a very small portion of it in the most northwest corner, but the only two really predominantly abutting properties are the Currys and the Sullivans, yes.
I suggest that we have Dr. Daniel speak, and then if you can bring up the changes that you've made, and then we will take a small break after that.
And Mr. Pettish, I will offer this back to you for your file, and thank you. I see exactly where you're referencing now.
Mayor, you asked me to pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
This is the application.
Okay, that's what he just got, okay.
On the second page of the application form, I will zoom in.
Thank you very much.
This is how it reads right here. This is where this,
The reference to the high school.
Yeah, the text of the PD document itself does not include high school as an allowed use, and then specifically says anything not referenced here would not be allowed. But I see on the application document itself the mention of a high school.
Okay. Thank you, BJ. Okay, state your name, please, and your address.
Excuse me, my name is Tom Daniel. My residence is 1096 McNeil Street in Carthage. My equine clinic is located 635 Valley View Road, Southern Pines. I came here in 1989 as an equine veterinarian to set up my own practice 1 year out of an internship. And I specifically came here because Southern Pines, because of the nature of Southern Pines and what that would mean to my business and my ability to work with a certain level of horse. I subsequently partnered up and named my business Southern Pines Equine for a very specific reason, because that meant to anyone who heard my name, we were associated with quality in horse, because we always have been. Dottie Greenleaf spoke earlier, and she is one of the ones, we've been attracting horse people here for decades. There's a reason that they came to Southern Pines. It was an established horse community when they came here, and it remains an established horse community. I'm here to represent the horse, because if you're not a horseman, you don't get them. You just don't get them. You don't understand the nature. I respectfully disagree with whoever's definition of horse country is. Horse country is where horse people congregate and aggregate. They do that for a reason, because they understand the horse. They understand the nuance. They understand the danger. I can drive, I have done this, and drive up and down Young's Road with new people and say, that one died right there because the horse took off in the carriage and he threw him into a tree. And that one died right there because she jumped a brown bale that's too big, and she shouldn't have done that. And one of my clients had a show horse, used to show horsing, at a show, standing there next to a ring like they'd done 1,000 times before. And something suddenly happened on the other side of her. That horse jumped into her. She hit the ground, her head, and when she sat up, she answered one question and then died. Her husband's still a client of mine. This had one horse? Yeah. One horse. That horse. One horse? Yep, that one. Did you know that was going to happen? Nope. That's the horses are they don't have, the horses don't fight unless you really corner them. They'll get you. They don't like me much for what I do to them. They are flight. Fright first, fright and flight. What frightens them? Anything, everything. I had a horse that if you moved where the wheelbarrow was stored in the barn, when he noticed it finally, don't change that. Change. Stresses him out. I don't know if you read the letter that I submitted, but I have taken a particular interest in my practice in stomach scoping. gastroscopes. Because why? Because these horses get stressed out, and it is very unhealthy for them, to the point where it drives them into this state of ulceration that then exacerbates their bad behavior, because now they're angry all the time. So the horse is very unique, and I guess I would have to be a part of a process to figure out how to mitigate these effects on the horses. That's a big challenge. That's a big challenge. The horse park, I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, out in Hope County, big, huge facility, lots of horse shows. Well, at our horse show that we sponsor, next door to it, on the other side of a tree line, became the sounds of motorbikes. They could see flashes of them, and they could hear them. It did not go well. It was during our horse show on Saturday, and that was country smart, because those people wanted the horse park to buy their property. And they just said they were going to do that every weekend, and the horse park knew that was completely incompatible with what we do. By the very next weekend, when there was a dressage show, there's a different owner of that piece of property. Horse park. They solved it. They didn't solve it by trying to figure out a way around it. They solved it because they knew it's incompatible. I don't have any examples of what this would do to horses for a reason. None of my clients choose to build next to stuff like this. And none of my clients choose to build where this is going to happen next to them. So I can't tell you what this is specifically going to do. I can only project from my 33 years experience of doing what I'm doing as to how this would affect these horses. Now I'm going to speak, that's the horse. Now I'm going to speak to the horse community, because that's where I make my living. That's where our feed stewards make their living, our farriers make their living. I could go on and on and on. And our real estate people make a lot of money, and have over the course of time. Now, why Southern Pines? If you're familiar with what we do, we were it. I mean, when I got here, holy cow, we were the top. Then stuff happens. Ocala, Aiken, Tryon now. These are all destination places. I talk to my clients. Why did you come here from Arizona? Why did you come here from California? Why did you choose here? Because Southern Pines is everything to the horse community. You got it all. You got the support of the town. You have the support of the town for our horse community and our horse people. Don't endanger our reputation. It means a lot. We have Olympians here currently. I was lucky enough, because I came into Southern Pines, and who was in Southern Pines, within 5 years of me moving here, I had a horse in the Olympics, Sydney Olympics, 7th. Holy cow. That's because Southern Pines horse community. And don't you doubt, this was Dave Kelly's. Dave Kelly was a giant that made Southern Pines. When I got here, that version was a man named Mark Weisbecker. You drive on US 1 north of the old Belk, and you notice that beautiful farm on the right. That's Mark. Mark is an international judge of 3-day eventing at the highest level. He had his horses in that barn. Everybody in 3-day eventing knows Mark Weisbecker. I remember going flat out trying to get there because I heard there was a fire at the Kelly barn. It was contained. This piece, there are others now, the meadows, the fields. I think y'all are familiar. There's these little pockets of horse country, aggregation and collection of horse people that are now spotted all over this county, driving revenue everywhere. That's horse country to me, because my clients all aggregate there. It's all to say they all are there because they all understand each other. They're not going to do something that's going to endanger their neighbor. That's why they do this, and that's why they look for places that would allow them to develop this into horse farms that didn't previously exist, or translate this huge piece of property into something that a lot more people can now enjoy, not just one man. It's important to our community, of which I am a part, and am proud to be a part. I love this place. There's nothing like this place anywhere. Please don't endanger that. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Anyone have questions for Dr. Daniel?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Did you want to show us the changes?
Pete Bogle, 1655 Country Hill Drive, Salisbury, North Carolina. I will say I'm at least a half an hour. If you want to take a break before that, that'd be fine. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
10
I
minutes.
could use one too.
They talked for 2.5 hours. And it's locked. The temperature thing is locked. I just asked if they could do something. Because it's flipping freezing in here. Well, I did get the fans off. We're waiting on, live mics. We do have live mics. If everyone can get to their seats, please, so we can continue. Thank you. Go ahead.
At the break, we discussed what was requested of the
Is
council.
that mic on? Because it should be, but,
At the break.
okay, thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We discussed the request, and it would be having talked with Andy, recommendation. Pete wants to make a 5-minute.
Oh, yay.
5-minute.
All in favor, say aye.
If we can't resolve it in mediation, you might get a longer presentation in a month or two.
Okay.
But just to kind of hit some high points, and then we've agreed to a local mediator, and we're going to try and get things done, so.
That's the best way to do things. Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
If I may, real quick, Mr. Van Camp, you mentioned a month or two. I know you said you had already had some dates from a mediator. Just asking for purposes of continuation later, whether we should do it for 1 month or go ahead and do it for 2.
Let me complicate it further. Pete's 25th wedding anniversary is on the date of the next meeting.
What's important to you? I mean, really? You're a smart married man.
I know.
A special meeting, which, our special session sometime.
Like 6 weeks.
Yeah, like that. The dates I have are late May and early June for media. So, I mean, it could be that we don't need, and I can actually come here and pretend to be Pete and say we got it resolved, and that would be good too, so. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Is that what you needed?
Well, when you all get around to continuing, then we
We'll have
can
it. We'll pick a real
revisit
date.
that, and yeah.
Okay. All right.
So compressing here, just real quickly. So the PD process, we actually wanted to do this because it is very transparent, very open, and it actually, unlike a special use permit where it's quasi-judicial, PD process actually gives advantages to anybody who's arguing against, because they
Right.
don't have to bring in expert testimony and all those pieces. So we like that we've approached it this way. Plus, the PD that we've put together is a lot more transparent and provides a lot more information than the minimum that's required. And we did that intentionally to bring up these conversations. We feel that these conversations have been good to have. We're by no means ignoring Pine Barrens. Every revision that we've made so far has been specifically addressing concerns from Pine Barrens, and we'll continue to do that. And that's where we're headed with this, is yes, we are willing to have a mediation and sit down and talk with them. At some point, there may be a point, like you said, where we just have to agree not to get along or not to, nowhere in your UDO does it say you have to have everybody's signature and permission. That's part of the growth process. I serve as the chairman of the planning board in my county. I get that. I hear that side all the time. So that's really probably where I ought to stop without getting into anything else. So we look forward to the next steps as well.
Very, very,
Happy
very,
anniversary.
very much.
Thank you.
We do appreciate that. So I guess I am looking for a motion to continue with a date, please.
Again, that motion will need to contain a specific date.
Yes.
Your next business meeting, like this one, is obviously Tuesday, the 14th, which we've already heard Mr. Bogle has a small conflict with. A prior
Yeah.
commitment, yes.
A big commitment.
Yes. So your options at that point would, at least amongst those regularly scheduled meetings, would be Monday, the 27th, which would be a 3 p.m. work session meeting. You could go to Wednesday, the 6th, which is the 6th, that it would be in June.
June
Wednesday, the
6th.
6th of July which would be your agenda meeting, 6 PM, but
I
at
would
the Haney
prefer that
Room.
it not be July 6th.
At which point then you're looking at the 5th, 7 more days after. The 12th of July, which would be 2 full meetings, and I simply offer those as your regular scheduled meetings. But again, that brings it 2 months out, and it sounded like Mr. Van Camp was looking at something that was more than the month, but less than 2 months, so.
That suit you all?
Which one? July 12th?
July 12th.
I have no objection to the 12th. I would also be amenable to the regular meeting in June, and if we need additional time, coming back at that time and requesting it, but that would allow an opportunity to resolve it.
The regular meeting is the 14th, is that correct? Of June?
Of June, it's the 14th, July is the 12th.
Okay.
Yeah, June 14th, which he,
I defer to the preference of the applicant on it. I just wanted to get it.
Continue to June 14th, and if we have a resolution, people need to be here and I can present it. And if we don't have a resolution, we can kick it to the floor.
I'm looking for a motion.
Make a motion that we continue until June 14th.
Second.
Pleasure to council.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all. I hope you can work things out. We appreciate your willingness to work together. We really do. Thank you.
This is a wonderful paradigm
Absolutely.
of getting along. Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to clean out the room.
That went down. We didn't need public comment. With all these people, because they don't know what they're speaking to anymore.
All right. I need a motion to open the MSD.
I move to open MSD 01-22, Municipal Service District.
Second.
Pleasure to council. Aye.
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 Turning it over to Mr. Parsons.
Man, that was,
If the people out in the hall could remember, we still have a meeting to conduct. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. We are not done.
okay.
BJ, if you could just put the map up from the packet. Madam Mayor, members of council, you're looking at a map that you've seen quite a few times in the last 6 weeks or so. We're here simply to hold the public hearing on the municipal service district that is being proposed for the area also known as the Morganton Park South PDP or Planned Development Area, also maybe more commonly known as the Target Project area. The purpose of the municipal service district is to potentially reimburse or pull taxes from the land that is shaded blue there, which represents 3 parcels, one of which is the Conti property currently under option from Mid-Atlantic Development, and the target plans that you have seen and the multifamily development plans you will soon be seeing relative to that project. And then 2 tracts that are owned currently by the Van Camp family. The purpose of municipal service district, again, is that there would be a tax rate placed on the parcels shaded in blue over and above the tax rate that is townwide, and those revenues would very specifically go toward, in this instance, the discussed parkway to run between 15501 and Morganton Road to serve not only the target development, but all future development within this area, in addition to just general traffic that is currently flowing on 15501 and also Morganton Road. So again, purpose this evening is the general statute requirement of a public hearing, and after I leave the mic, individuals in the public will be allowed to come forward and ask questions or receive any additional data. The remainder of the schedule on this would be after the closure of the hearing this evening. Council will be provided the opportunity under action items to do an initial adoption of the MSD. This is a rarity in North Carolina general statute in that it is actually required that you vote twice before adopting the MSD. So should this move forward this evening with a first vote, there will be a second vote placed before you next June 14th, as we were just discussing, to adopt the MSD. You will also have the reimbursement agreement for consideration that evening, and you'll have a discussion about the reimbursement agreement for the upcoming work session here in a couple of weeks. And then also on the 14th, you'll be adopting the town budget, part of which will be the additional tax rate that is being discussed, which to date has always been discussed in year one as being just a doubling or 40 additional pennies on this area. Those funds to go into a special revenue account and ultimately toward the first payment that would be incurred on that reimbursement agreement in fiscal year '24. So happy to take any questions from the council at this point. Otherwise, I'll step away from the mic and let you run the rest of the public hearing.
Do y'all have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Public comments?
I
Seeing
guess my
none?
only question is Ms. Rucker with us then on the second reading? Is that what's happening?
Yes. Mayor
I have
Nagy.
invited Ms. Rusher to join us for the
Rusher,
work
sorry.
session so that we can discuss the details of the reimbursement agreement.
Yeah, we talked.
I don't have confirmation of that yet, but I have put the invitation out.
Okay, I need a motion to close.
So moved.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye.
Nice. There you go.
Okay, as you just said, we do not vote. This is kind of strange. You open, close, but that's it. I need a motion to open the first presentation of fiscal year budget.
I'll move to open the initial presentation for budget 22-23.
Second.
Pleasure of the council. Before we get started, I would like to thank the directors. Tess is here, our financial guru and her staff, our assistant town manager, and obviously Reagan for putting this document together. It is a many month process, and we take our financial fiduciary responsibility obviously very seriously. I appreciate the time, the thought, and the hard work it takes to get us to this point. We do thank you very much. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually going to utilize the fact that we've got this walkable technology now and get away from that podium a little bit. And you stole a little bit of my thunder, but I want to begin where I will also end today, which is with thanking all of the town council, absolutely all of the staff and the citizens in making this budget possible and really kind of bringing it all together. A couple of special shout outs though. Tess Brubaker-Spees, our finance director who keeps all these numbers in order and presentable. And also Jessica Roth. Probably more than anybody in the room, Ms. Coleman has attended more budget hearings over the years than anyone. You're actually going to see some new slides this evening. It's going to look a little bit different than the annual dog and pony show that I put on.
Like when you go to Sunday school, you get a pen, maybe we can get her a pen or something.
Wizard with these presentations.
We know. I think she did that before.
I'll try not to butcher all of the good graphics, but you'll all get to look at the same information in a little bit different light this evening. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the current fiscal year we're in and what we're experiencing. Again, Southern Pines, accountable, transparent, financially strong. We have maintained a 40-cent tax rate for a number of budget seasons now. We've experienced, according to Moore County, a tax base growth of 5%. If you read my budget message, you will note that that is very important. If you're not growing, you're dying. That is not a suggestion for a lot of bad growth, a lot of out of control growth. However, that 5% growth over the last year means that we're able to put this budget forward and otherwise would be looking for 4 pennies additional on the tax rate to be able to fund the budget were it not for that new development. So that is a key point. Growth is good within reason. Sales tax receipts have been fantastic. Who knows whether that maintains? There's some reasoning behind that, some of which is sustainable, some of which is already starting to go away. We all read the stories and watch the news about potential recessions. All of that could affect the sales tax. I do hope we have a little bit of buffer because that growth has been fantastic for a few years, and a lot of that is the capture of the online sales tax. Again, to Tessa's credit, and certainly Crystal before her, we received our Excellence in Financial Reporting Award for the 30th consecutive year. That's going to be more than
Good job.
a whole bunch of places in North Carolina, so fantastic work by the finance staff. Also launched Civic Clerk and are now live streaming these meetings for better or worse, because we're struggling through some technological difficulties at times, but it is an increased service. I'm not going to read this entire slide. You've had a chance to kind of look through it, but clearly we're doing a lot of work on maintaining community assets between paving and water lines and the number of work orders Public Works is involved with, quality of life issues. Again, the DFI project, which we've had huge meetings on both Saturday and Thursday of this past week, and council will be hearing about next steps with that, and those next steps may involve a little bit of a slowdown or a reconsideration, but we've continued with that DFI project up to this point. Again, partnered with the Land Trust, and we're able to pick up an additional park in West Southern Pines with the purchase we were able to make there. That purchase was only necessary because of the available fund balance that we'll talk a little bit about. Those are the types of instances. There could be a great debate about whether the purchase of that park would ever rise to the level of an emergency where you would dip into your 25%. But the available fund balance allows you to not debate whether it's an emergency or not and actually just make decisions based upon community interest. And that's the importance of having that available fund balance. Whitehall Master Plan, we have initially selected a team to undertake that. We are working through the contract, and that'll be something kicking off in the very near future. So again, project moving forward. Police, again, CALEA accreditation with excellence, something that very, very few law enforcement agencies around the state can actually say. Permit reviews and inspections have been up. Fire responding to more calls. Again, body-worn cameras and Citizen Connect, 2 huge increases in service and really important to our police department that we implemented in the last year. And the fire department installed over 425 smoke detectors and/or batteries. Again, road here, another great Jessica graphic. I actually looked at this slide and I thought about suggesting we make it circular, because this road talks a little bit about our internal process, which begins with the staff way back in January, and actually they get some information from Tess before they go off for Christmas with the families that say, by the way, you've got capital forms due shortly after you return. So it says January, but it really kicks off in December. But I say circular because this is really an ongoing and constant process. This road might suggest we begin in January, we finish in June, and then we don't think about budget for the next 6 months. That is far from the case. Every public comment that gets made at these meetings, every complaint, or every platitude that comes into an office, those all kind of go into the minds of the directors and staff as we move forward and look toward those capital forms and those projects that will be talked about beginning in January. So it is a year-round process. So we go from the staff development, management review, that's when we all get together and come together to put a draft budget together. You will recall at the retreat, which is under the council review, I gave you sort of a line-by-line making of the sausage of the pluses and minuses, where we started some $3 million short of balance and ended up at $3 million to the good, plus an available fund balance at that point of a little over $400,000. That number's come down some due to some decisions at the retreat. And then finally, the formal items going forward. We've got the first public hearing tonight. Not on this slide is the fact that if anything comes out of tonight that you suggest staff go back and adjust, change, or otherwise take a look at, we'll have that, assuming it's something that can be done quickly. We'll have the outcome of that, or what that all means, for your work session later this month, where I'll be providing an update. And then we roll into the June 14th second hearing and ask for adoption that evening. So that evening you will see everything from a budget resolution to adopt, a tax rate motion that will need to be made and adopted, potentially the MSD I just discussed. You will also see a series of resolution and ordinances dealing with Things like any increases in the utility fees, we'll have to update that section of the code in that appendix. Any other increases or changes in fees will also be dealt with in a separate resolution. So you'll see a lot of documentation on the 14th, all of which are tied to this budget, which is to say that by that point, saying no on any particular item can completely throw all the numbers in the budget off and create some havoc. So let's have those discussions in the coming weeks as opposed to waiting till June 14th, I guess would be my recommendation.
That's the reason we see this over and over again.
That is correct. Economic realities we faced in putting this budget together. Unfortunately, 3 of these 4 are not positive. The bottom right corner, tax base is strong. That's fantastic. I talked about the 5% already. Sales taxes, at least for the time being, we expect to remain strong. The other 3 are all more than offsetting the advantages of the 4th box. Rising expenses, we all feel it in our homes. It's certainly true of every service that the town also provides, be it contractual or be it internal. Challenging labor market. I've been in this business 28 years now. I cannot remember a time that was more difficult in finding qualified employees interested in coming to work, interested in doing public service. An awful lot of what we do is very difficult to change in a way that attracts a lot of the new workforce. You can read almost any trade magazine, you can watch the news, you can watch the studies. People are looking for flex time, they're looking for 4-day work weeks, they're looking for working from home. We have individual positions that we have some capacity to do that with. And I've spoke with all the directors about, bring me your ideas. We want to attract the best and the brightest, we want to keep them. But law enforcement officers, not an easy job to do from home. Maybe some detective work. Street and public works employees, again, not a simple thing. Can't pick up garbage from your home. So it is challenging and it's going to continue to be challenging. It is a very tight labor market right now across the board. Capital projects are another issue. You've got an amendment later this evening on a project as an example. It's just, there are too few contractors, a lot of money floating around right now, and supply chain issues and supply costs are off the charts. And so anything we do is going to cost quite a bit more money than the original estimates said it would if those estimates were done anytime prior to basically the last 6 months at the rate of things have been increasing. So those are all challenges we have to deal with in putting this budget together. Going to not spend a lot of time on this other than to say, I know there's a lot of questions around ARPA. I'm going to be speaking with community connectors tomorrow evening specifically about this. I know I spent some significant time with the council at the retreat going over it, but we are set to receive a total of $4.671 million. We've only seen half of that to date. The other part should come in on or around July 1. We have elected to take the standard allowance, meaning that it's simply what they're calling revenue loss or revenue replacement. That was already done with the required filing on April the 30th that Tess did. So that part of it is done. And what that means to the council, as we discussed back at the retreat, is that in all likelihood in August, if we get stuff done in July, I might have it here, but in all likelihood in August, we'll be bringing in some initial paperwork for reporting purposes in the fall, kind of applying those funds to meet the federal standards, and then start talking about, at that point, some projects that we can add back into this budget based upon the replaced revenue. So look to do that. Look to do that in August, but I'll say the first quarter of the fiscal year. So this is the old balance sheet with some colors and things on it. The bottom line here that you'll look at is the available fund balance of $266,025. Again, in a standard year, I generally like to really stand here and say that number is somewhere north of $400,000. The ARPA realities and the revenue replacement make me perfectly comfortable with the 266 that we have there. That 266 is less than the 400 we brought to you back at retreat. The reason for that is you'll recall we had very lengthy discussion about solid waste fees And the original budget draft talked about trying to have residents pay for 75% of the cost of those fees. Council directed us that, look, it's going to be a pretty significant increase in price to the residents. Go back, rework it at 60%, which we did. And then thankfully, the county also came across with the 5% growth number instead of a 3% or 2% that we were looking at. And we ended up at 266 to the good. So again, comfortable with that number given all of the other realities. This is the old pie chart turned into something a little bit different graphically. Biggest issue here, or biggest message, not issue, ad valorem taxes, that's your property taxes. We'll talk about what those are specifically here in a sec. But 55% of the budget, that's actually a little lower than typically, usually 57, 58, but it's because the next category, unrestricted intergovernmental revenues, sales tax, has increased so drastically. So it's just sales tax is a bigger part of the pie, which isn't a bad thing at all because it just helps to diversify our portfolio of revenues here with the town. Looking at those, again, ad valorem property taxes, land, buildings, improvements to land. It's also on personal property, public service companies. Bottom line, a little over $11.5 million in revenues, more than 50% as the last graphic showed. And if you were to suddenly this evening say we want to add a penny or drop a penny from the tax rate, that would mean in real terms $298,000. For budgeting purposes, because we budget at 98.5% collection rate, it would be a $293,705 swing in the budget. So additional penny would generate that revenue. Reducing it would eat up all of your available fund balance and actually dip into your 25%. So this budget includes a tax rate of 40 pennies, which is the same rate that has been levied since 2017-18. So for every $100 of assessed value, you'll pay 40 cents of taxes to the town on that $100. The maximum tax rate for North Carolina local governments is $1.50. We don't ever want to be there. Again, unrestricted intergovernmental revenues, most part this is sales tax divided into 4 different articles, 3 of which are, it's all distributed from the state back to Moore County. 3 of those are then distributed from Moore County out to municipalities and the county general fund based upon a population formula. The other third is actually based on a point of sale formula. Needless to say, we do a little better comparatively relative to point of sale than we do population because there is one community and then the county itself that has more population than Southern Pines, so they see the greatest percentage of those revenues gained. 3 bottom things there that are also contained in this: utility franchises, video programming, and then the beer and wine tax. Sales tax, $4.1 million of revenue projected. You see the little yellow line there in the giant jump from 1920 to 2021. Again, a number of reasons for that, a large one being that in February of 20, in advance of COVID, the state legislature changed some laws and allowed for greater capture of online sales tax. Timing could not have been more perfect because clearly during COVID, with a lot of things shuttered, a lot of people were buying things online. Then there was a lot of direct federal aid to taxpayers and tax breaks, and it seems that a lot of that money, again, sitting at home bored, I guess, during COVID. Amazon did very well for a very long time. Stock hasn't looked as good over the last couple weeks. But sales have remained very strong. And then most recently, bottom line is inflation, at least initially, will result in some greater sales taxes because what cost you $100 before might cost you $120 now. Sales tax is a percentage on whatever was sold. It generates a little more revenue. Clearly, there's a law of diminishing returns because at some point you stop buying. We haven't seen the diminishing returns yet, but it's bound to occur at some point. Our other revenue sources, we've got some permits and fees. That inspections number will tend to, it has been very strong for the last few years. That is also a difficult one though, because the state has begun to treat that without fully legally making it the case. They've begun to treat that like an enterprise fund. So any money we bring in in building inspections. Tess is actually filling out reports now, sending them to the state of North Carolina. We have to show that we're spending those revenues on building inspection type activities. So it's not like you can double your inspection fees and then help pay for garbage with it or something. It doesn't work that way. It's becoming a very restricted revenue. Again, planning fees, public works, streets, zoning, police, those all vary. Those would be like cuts of roads that we go out and fix and charge back, and they're very small in the grand scheme of the budget. Our restricted intergovernmental revenues are almost entirely our POW bill allocation, which has increased. Again, change at the legislature and actually having a state budget helped us out there. And then occasionally we get small library and recreation grants that go into that same revenue line item. And then you've got your ABC taxes. We do have a $5 municipal vehicle tax. You are allowed to levy up to $20 per vehicle, but per $5, you're generating about $61,000. We put that towards sidewalk construction in the town. And then this is an interesting one. If you look at your documents, you might see the term short-term rental. And of course, that is a very controversial topic right now, particularly in Pinehurst. And I said, this doesn't add up. I know this isn't the house that gets rented short-term. This is an Airbnb because that's the occupancy tax, that's the CVB. So Tess went back and took a look at it. It turns out that after a legislative change in about 2008, Crystal had run through a resolution before the council, but this is actually property taxes on heavy equipment rentals. So when you see short-term rental in your documentation, if your mind's like mine, you immediately go to Airbnb or Vrbo or whatever your favorite place is. It actually has nothing to do with that whatsoever. It is heavy equipment rentals. So think Richmond Rental and a lot of the stuff that rolls out of there. Solid waste disposal tax, $10,000. Yeah, I kind of thought I might throw short-term rental up there and get a lot of questions about short-term rentals, so we went back and clarified that. Goals for this year, as in with many years, maintain current service levels. We hold the property tax up there at 40 cents. We always try to put together a budget that does that, and then we have conversations at the retreat around whether council wants to add things that might require that it increase. This year, right now, as it's drafted, it holds it at 40 cents. Obviously, we want to continue to pay all of our debt service, the employer of choice issue, I already addressed that a little bit. Be responsible with the ARPA funds, and a lot of that conversation will occur post-July 1. 25% fund balance, and then alternatives to tax increases to mitigate inflation and other rising costs. The two fees that will see some increase. The one of great significance is the solid waste. The other one is we've had some discussion around recreation and facility rentals. Again, not a giant generator of revenue, but it is a change that hasn't been made in many years. We did significantly increase in this budget our street resurfacing, and you'll recall the presentation that Assistant Manager Roth made along with Corey Albers about our pavement survey and the amount of paving, and the allocation increase is pretty significant from 275 to 9, but also remember that the cost of asphalt and that contracting has gone up. So we'll be able to do additional lane miles, but unfortunately, I'm sure it'll be at a little bit greater cost per mile than what we've been doing. Again, we're going to continue the work on the dam repair at Reservoir Park, and that's an item that the state of North Carolina has great interest in. They've really picked up on their dam inspections and things after some of the challenges around the state, including Wood Lake right here in Moore County. We're allocating $100,000 to the Douglas Community Center pavement project. $100,000 will not pay for it. We've got a few dollars in the pavement fund. We'll go to bid. We'll come back with a price. We'll probably be talking about revenue replacement to make that whole project work, but that will at least get some engineering and get the thing started. When I say that won't do it, I hope it's not going to be $200,000. It's just that it won't be $100,000. So we've already dealt with the stream bank stabilization project in the last 60 days, so that'll be kicking off in the coming months. Penn PD Waterline project, again, wrapping up the money side of that this evening. And then we've got money transferring to the water plant and the continued upgrades there. And then we're also trying to build those retained earnings toward all of the capital improvement projects that are on the utility side. Comprehensive long-range plan, we've got $250,000 in the budget to be able to do that in the coming year. BJ just received this earlier this week, 8 RFQs from firms interested in working on that project. So he and I began emailing a little bit today about that sort of vetting process and moving toward it. So we're still on schedule very much to be able to kick that off on July 1 with the budget. And then we've got two fire vehicles. These are staff SUVs, not fire trucks. Some extrication equipment for the heavy rescue. 6 police vehicles scheduled. 2 additional officers as of July 1, if of course we can find them and hire them. An additional planning position and an additional IT position. Both of those are budgeted to be effective January 1 of 2023. So they're mid-year budget additions. Again, $1 of money collected by Southern Pines. This is how it kind of gets divided up in grand schemes: public safety, general government, culture, recreation, transportation, economic, physical development. What do each of those represent? Public safety is fire and police. General government, administration, buildings and grounds, finance, fleet, IT, legislation, public works, and sanitation. So almost everything administrative in order to support public safety, cultural, recreation, all these other things. That public works and sanitation, again, as this budget is drafted, 40% of the cost of providing garbage service falls back on that dollar collected. 60% will be billed out on the utility bills. Average tax bill for a Town of Southern Pines taxpayer, $1,297 based on 40 pennies. Also based on the average town property value, which is $324,146. So if you have a $324,146 property, that's your land and building, you will pay the town that $1,297 I just showed on that slide. Last year's average was $321, so it's gone up almost $3,000. Relatively speaking, this slide last year, which wasn't this pretty and was laid out a little bit different, off the top of my head, I think the increase last year was $20,000. So the $3,000 is actually pretty demonstrative of many of the homes going up are actually below this average, and the growth is not nearly as great as it has been in recent years. But that's the average property value right now for Southern Pines, according to Moore County. Residential solid waste fees will increase to $16.75, again representing only 40%, or representing only 60% of the actual cost of providing that service. And in the water and sewer fees are set to increase 5% across the board. This equals $3.49 a month for the average consumer of 5,000 gallons a month. The availability or base fee, $20.75, and then 5% on the per thousand rate. So again, general fund, all existing services. There is a 5% employee market adjustment across the board scheduled. We also have some very targeted adjustments within our pay scale for positions that have been particularly difficult to land. And then, of course, as we bring in new people and you have to hire entry, you have to reach agreement on what they're going to make. That can affect your existing employees. So there's a lot of equity things that Bruce Rosenberger deals with on a daily basis. So again, the 5% market adjustment across the board. I'd mentioned the 2 police officers, the planning and the IT position. It does maintain at full cost the 6 firefighters that were funded by the SAFER grant. That SAFER grant expires in this fiscal year. We were covering 75% of those costs in this fiscal year. That grant has expired. Those 6 will now be completely funded by the budget. That is different than the 6 we talked about last fall and that the current grant is being looked at for. The current grant application, however, is for a SAFER grant that covers 100% for 3 years. So it is a better grant than the one that those 6 were hired under a little over 3 years ago. Again, street vehicles, $200,000 to the sidewalk CPF. That will continue the work on Bennett Street as things are planned now. Sidewalks will very much be a discussion that I'm pretty confident we will be having with the replacement of revenue and ARPA and everything going on there. So in particular, I want to talk with the community connectors about sidewalk blocks within West Southern Pines that the community would be interested in, making sure that certain activities and things there connect. So that'll be one that I'm sure we'll be revisiting. But right now, we've got our regular $200,000 transfer scheduled. Again, DCC, Park Dam, Fire. That self-propelled lift was actually in this year's budget. It has been on order for the entire year. It just simply isn't going to get here by June 30th. So it's money that will technically carry over, but we've got to reappropriate it in the new fiscal year. We are likely to run into that with any number of vehicles. I spoke with Mike Cameron today. We're trying to work through some letters of intent and thing that will get, for instance, the 2 fire vehicles ordered. We can't do a PO clearly till July 1. However, the dealer, and it's under a state contract, is saying that he's got to get orders in order to even suggest that we'll get these before June 30th of 23, because there's only so many vehicles being made. Supply chain issues are really a challenge right now. Payments, police, fire, Whitehall, the fire truck, community development, that's it right now. And specifically, you'll note that the police station comes off in 23-24, as does the Whitehall purchase. So we're nearing the end of those particular debts. Fire truck in 24-25, and then of course the fire station and the community development building are far more recent projects, but at the very least, we're looking at 2.06 and 1.91% interest on those. So very good projects, and will serve the community for a very long time. 25% rainy day fund or fund balance, we've talked about on a number of occasions. Jessica was nice enough to dig up a very old picture of me when I had color. It's a black and white picture, and I still have more color in my hair. But the real key here, as I've discussed with council, Mike, by choice. Mike Cameron will be appointed as a second assistant town manager July 1 with this budget. And then, so this chart takes on a little bit different look. Water and sewer operations, again, 5% across the board. I think I've covered all of that, 349. And then on the capital side, we're moving almost $1 million into the sanitary sewer modernization fund. This is a fund that we've been moving $400,000 to $500,000 to as part of the Withers and Ravenel sewer rehab project that was a 10-year period, and I think this will be year 3 of that. The remainder between that, I think it's $467,000 and the $874, represents a project that we have to undertake over at Longleaf and the Longleaf Dam. We've got an exposed or above ground or elevated sewer line there that's actually not underground. They're doing work, long needed work on the dam at the Longleaf community. We've got to do some stuff with our line as a result of that. So that's the additional money going into that fund this year. 665 to the water treatment plant, and then we've got 130 replenishing our water repair and rehabilitation projects, and 75 our sewer repair and rehab projects. These last 2 funds, you will actually see resolutions next month to close the existing funds and then open new funds. We do that every 10 years or so that take anything that's in those funds out for amortization and reporting purposes, and then we kind of clean them up. So any money left in the funds as they are on the books will be transferred into new funds, and those old ones will be closed out simply for accounting purposes. So you'll see those on your agenda next month. Our only utility fund debt is the AMR project, or the meters, and we are within this. When you adopt this budget, that $176,000 payment will represent the final payment on that project. So that will all be paid for and off the books. And then the 1/3 of the community development building that we charged to the utility fund represents $35,000 in payment coming out of the utility fund. So bottom line, all current service levels are maintained. Property tax rate held at 40 pennies. Obviously, we continue to move money toward capital assets and facilities. The rainy day fund stays in place. 266 in available fund balance for consideration of projects in the coming year. Again, the ARPA funds will be revisiting again in the first quarter. The CLRP will be updated. The staff will be added in police planning and IT, and we'll continue to pay all of our debts. So again, thank you very much. Thank you to Tess and Jessica and all the directors for making this possible. Always a pleasure to present this, even if I just run out of voice. But this is always an interesting project, and I absolutely enjoy doing it in Southern Pines. There are challenges, as I've said to any number of you. Our biggest challenges are based in a reality that people want to be here, and that's a far better situation to be in than the alternative.
And because of the wonderful graphics, it's very easy to follow. Jessica, thank you. Great job on graphics, by the way. But it's a very easy read, and sometimes I think citizens get sort of bogged down on budget if they care at all. They get bogged down. So thank you very much. We do appreciate it.
Entertaining questions?
We'll take any questions from the council at this point, and then I'll step away from the mic and let the public hearing proceed.
My first one is remind me what RFQ is.
Request for qualifications.
Second thing is Jessica, that slideshow, so good. And Tess, thank you for all you've done. DFI is mentioned in the slideshow. Are there additional costs? I mean, I attended both the DFI sessions, and I think we have lots of work to do. Are there additional costs, and have we reached the end of what we've contracted for, or do we need to take into consideration what needs to happen from here? Talk to me about that.
We have not reached the end of what we contracted for, because the end of what we contracted for is DFI actually going out with a council-endorsed plan and marketing it to potential developers. So they've got a lot of heavy lifting to do once and if we ever get to that point.
Okay, so that contract is not 2 public meetings and we're done? Because there was a lot left hanging, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work ahead. The only thing I could foresee, and I don't have a final disposition on this, if in fact the plans that have been presented to date are to change, I'll say significantly. And what I mean by that is, well, the contract that we had outside of just the direct DFI contract was the contract with neighboring or neighborhood concepts. So they were the land planners who came in and did the fit studies, just to kind of determine how much density could fit on there. And all of the conversation I've heard to date really talks about potentially cutting into that density. So there may not be a need to do additional fit studies other than if for simply presentation, conceptual types of things. But I could foresee the possibility, depending on council direction and what occurs with our next couple conversations, of having to free up some additional dollars for additional work on that land planning side. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
I can imagine the scenarios under which that could occur.
If that does occur, are we looking at something less than $100,000?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the original contract was far less than that.
But 60
so-
or 70,000, is memory serving me correctly there?
My contract, I was going to say, I thought the neighboring concepts was more in the 50 range.
It's okay,
BJ will pull
but
that.
I'm, okay.
But again, even any additional work with them, I wouldn't see as being equal to what's been done was a lot of base work so now it's kind of plugging things into the base work that's already been done, so.
No, it's fascinating and sort of energizing to watch the process take place, and I think.
Real challenge with that one will be at some point, depending on the changes you make, it no longer becomes financially feasible.
Okay.
So that's 38,000. 38 was the
Wow, they're
original
doing a lot for
contract, and I
38,000.
would not expect it to rise to that level again.
Can you tell me, and you may have already told me, and I apologize if I'm making you repeat yourself, how did we determine our need? How does one determine a need for 2 more police officers and 2 more police cars? How does that, just tell me the process. I'm not arguing with it, I just want to understand.
First of all, there are not 2 additional police vehicles currently in this budget. It was determined that we could take 2 that, I think you saw 6 total police vehicles between patrol and investigations that were due for replacement. We're going to try to stretch another year out of 2 of those 6. The other 4 will be surplused and sent off. So what's in there is simply salary for 2 additional police officers. That determination is really part of the overall staffing plan of Chief Polidori, and I think he was in, I don't remember if it was a work session or what, to talk about kind of what he's done with the staffing chart there and the different teams that he has out operating. But it's a formula that looks at both calls for service, part of what he has talked about, and again, this depends on being able to fully staff the number of authorized positions, but one of the common complaints becomes speed patrol, speed issues. That does not rise real high on the priority list compared to some of the crimes and things that they are dealing with. So it really is just, it's workload and availability of people that determine those requests.
He's the one that has done the A, B, C, D, E, the different shifts.
That's always been in place. He's just kind of
But he's
reorganized
added,
those.
yes, some captains to that additional, the shifting of,
Okay, so that is something that the council would not see. I haven't missed the boat on understanding that. That's something the council doesn't see his thinking. It simply comes to you and then gets presented to us as a need based on what he said, or is that something that we're?
I do recall very specifically
He came to
Nick
us.
giving a presentation. I honestly have to go back and look at when that occurred because
Before.
that's what I'm trying to read.
Yeah, that's okay.
yeah.
Might have been at the retreat. No, because we did that virtual. It was during a meeting, but it may very well have been.
Okay, all right.
But
At Mike's room, so.
that was not an
Either
item
a
he
work
went
session or.
over during orientation.
That was not really gone over during orientation as far as I remember. Do you remember?
Okay.
I don't think so. So
we can
I
get
just,
you something.
yeah, I'm just
Absolutely.
interested in how we
Yeah.
got there. And to me, I sort of consider that need to be social infrastructure. And as we grow and change, I think it's not just sewer lines, it's also additional police. And those become expenses that go with the growth. So I just want to understand.
In the case of your emergency services, whether Southern Pines grows another % or by some chance would decrease, as long as it continues to be a destination for shopping and entertainment and
Yeah,
that.
right.
That's going to, that's going to be a
gonna drive
growing need,
it.
whether we're actually seeing the growth or we're just seeing the effects of the growth around us.
Okay. And my last one is the $65,000 self-propelled lift that we're waiting for. Just tell me what that's used for, if you can.
And there was a picture of that, I think, in your
No, I've
retreat
seen
packet.
it, and then I also saw
So
one-
it basically replaces the bucket truck.
Okay.
And the reason for replacing a bucket truck, so where you might see it used most often is with putting up the banners and the Christmas wreaths and different things downtown.
Okay.
But the reason for the self-propelled lift over the bucket truck is it actually provides a more stable platform
Okay.
for tree trimming and things that they do along right-of-ways and around ditches from time to time. It's less to maintain, less to break down than the bucket truck, and it's actually a safer piece of equipment.
That's great, okay. And also, in regard to Mike Cameron, who I greatly admire, but coming on as another assistant town manager, talk to me about the additional cost that goes with that promotion, if you
So
can.
that is, and I should have said, it is not a net new position. He still,
Right.
he
No,
still
he's
will
still
be
doing his-
fire
right.
chief. It doesn't add one more person to the,
Right.
to the
Understand
org
that.
chart. It just kind of moves the org chart around. It's essentially going to be, from an additional cost perspective, it will be a salary increase for the additional responsibilities he will be taking on, and he'll be paid as an assistant town manager as opposed to a fire chief.
And so the increase for which the citizens are responsible, I'm not arguing with your decision, I'm just trying to, if you don't mind telling me, that would be great. Thank you.
So that would appear to be, if my math is correct off the top, about $19,000. And lacking that whatsoever and just applying 5% to his current salary, because again, that's
Well, that's
all
across the
inclusive,
board.
that's all inclusive
That's
of
across the board
everything.
for everyone who's an employee, correct? The 5%? The 5% is across the board for all?
It's across the board, but in this instance, it's
also
not cumulative. That
Right.
19 is inclusive of everything. And what I'm
Okay.
saying is if that were not occurring at all, the 5% would be essentially
Oh, I see what you're saying.
about 50, a little over $5,000. Forgive me, my math isn't working.
That's okay.
So the net increase over business as usual is about $14,000.
$14,000 annually, correct? Right. And then his responsibilities in regard to assistant town manager would be what?
Essentially, he will be,
It's up there.
uh-oh.
Oh, no, it was working so well, too. Yeah, sorry. Well, no wonder I can't tell because
on the chart,
I must be able to read
so
that.
essentially, he would have fire, engineering, utilities, IT, public works fall under him on that assistant stuff. So, he gets to deal with James and Corey, and we're probably
Well,
not paying
that's
him
worth a
enough.
lot, dealing with James.
Are there also consequences of his promotion that someone else has to be promoted into fire chief and an associated cost with that?
In the short term, and that was a big part of the conversation Mike and I had, and the interest in keeping it kind of net neutral as far as total number of employees. In the short term, and he's spoke with his staff about this too, he would remain fire chief, at least through the budget year. Now, in the event that we were to get the grant and 6 new firemen come on and we're going, that would be the point at which, after we were able to hire 6 and get them integrated and stuff, we might go back and revisit that question. Again, the goal would be to still have it be net neutral as far as number of employees, but how those ranks and things would work out are all things that we'll look at in the future, but that change is not occurring at this time.
And what did you say the time frame on that change could potentially be?
July 1.
So right now, we're looking at a net 14,000 change promotion, but it could turn into something just shy of 100,000. I'm trying to figure out, like, when we,
Trickle down,
like, as it trickles down and we have to move everyone else up to fill that void, or to fill his position.
At the point at which we would make that determination, we would be looking at the entire organizational chart there anyhow, which was already talked about when we talked about bringing on the 6.
Yeah.
So I can't say it would come to 100. I can't say it would come to more or less than 100, but it's not part of what we're looking at this moment.
I think it's from a bigger picture. He seems to be the logical one to do this. For Mike, not consider Mike, it sounds like we needed a second assistant town manager regardless. He's the one that's sort of helping fill that at some point. And so
We've moved back and forth over the years between 1 or 2. Really, when Jessica was brought on, we didn't make any move like this for the simple reason of let's see where she fits in, what's going on, what moves forward. We have increased pretty dramatically a lot of our efforts relative to PIO operations, which from time to time we've talked about hiring separate PIOs. We've done that She's very much involved in a lot of the transition of the clerk's office, very much involved in the agenda preparation and things now. Works very closely with the Recreation Department. It's really an opportunity based upon where she's operating and spending a lot of her time, and then seeing where I am continually spending more and more time, and sliding somebody like a Mike or whomever into the position would be of benefit. So there's no question, and you see it with your packets, you see it with the time spent in these meetings. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg of what goes on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I just got a couple questions. Will you remind me what the 665 towards the water plant is doing?
A long list of capital improvement projects. James, do you have anything specific that's occurring at the moment that?
So, yeah, like Ray mentioned, we've got, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but somewhere in the range, I think about $20 million of projects over the next 10-year period. Several of those are starting up. We actually, one of the grants that we attempted to submit for accounts for about $5 million of that work. What this $600-ish thousand about represents is really the engineering phase of those larger capital projects. It's kind of pre-funding the work, a bit ahead of time.
Okay. Thank you, James. And then can you help me understand what does the revenue replacement for Douglas Center repaving look like? Does that mean charging more for use of the Douglas Center?
The road.
So you said the 100,000 we had,
Was referring to on that, when I said revenue replacement, so after we go through the ARPA process and we basically call it lost revenue, and Tess will have a whole long line of forms that will show that it's paying salaries and things. That will allow movement of those funds from the special revenue account into your general fund or available fund balance.
Okay.
At which point that's an example of a project that you might tap into some of those funds to be able to complete the project. So that's what I meant by revenue
no,
replacement
that
on
helps.
that.
And then I guess my last is just a comment. I would like to see, I know that there are projects that the town would like and that our citizens would like, but I would like some of that ARPA money that is intended for lost revenue and government services to actually be held on to, because I'm afraid what's going to happen is that next year's reevaluation is going to cause property values to go up significantly, and it's going to become very difficult for us to maintain a net neutral tax. I would prefer some of that money be reserved to help our citizens or protect our citizens in that stagflation or recession or whatever is coming, because I think that we're going to find a place where our citizens, particularly those on a fixed income, are going to struggle.
So I think you might recall from the retreat, I had kind of a list of just, these are examples of projects. And I kind of drew a line on the top ones and said, these are ones that were kind of cut through the budget. We might come back with actual, some of them it would be, we could do it post-bid and just say, do you want to do the project or not? I think those totaled 600,000, if off the top of my head. We're talking about 4.6. It is not my intent to try to spend all of that replaced revenue in 1 year. I mean, the only way I could even imagine doing that, and I don't think we'd do it in the coming year because we haven't had the conversation about it, but if three of you stood up and said, we absolutely need to go build a town hall, or something of that nature where you're looking at a $5 million facility, you could pretty quickly burn through that money. And again, working through the math with Tess, and what you will probably see is somewhere in the vicinity, don't commit me to it yet because we're still working through numbers, but somewhere in the vicinity of a quarter to a third of those funds will be dedicated to utility projects. Then the other 2/3 will just be general fund types of things. But again, I cannot imagine burning through $4.6 million in the coming year. And that part of the advantage of this approach is that by being able to do the lost revenue, account for it for federal purposes. You saw on a slide on here, has to be appropriated by the end of fiscal year '24 and spent by the end of '26. Well, if as far as the federal reporting is concerned, we've already spent it, then those timeframes, because those timeframes are really problematic when you start talking about capital projects, because if it hasn't already been contemplated and engineered, there's a year to 18 months worth of work just to get ready for it. Then you bid it, then you hope, I mean, the Penn PD, James just got an update, the ductile iron pipe for that project that we're going to ask for the budget amendment so we can get the contract signed and get the pipe ordered is currently 10 months back ordered. So that isn't going to be something you'll see ground break on until maybe this time next year. So yeah, there's a lot of advantages to approaching this the way that we've talked about, but the intent would, part of the advantage of approaching it this way is you don't have to rush to spend it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that we have the ARPA funds, and even though we may not have had lost revenue during COVID, we are now going to see the results of that COVID changes, and I think it's going to hurt everyone in inflation. So I appreciate that it's been planned out the way it has. Thank you.
Questions? There's no responsibility for you or Taz to, we don't have to prove that we spent the ARPA funds by the end of some time period. Is that correct? We do have to do that, so they get subbed. That's what I thought, right.
That is
So
a
you're
different
asking-
conversation than some of the things we're talking about, though, so.
That's what I thought. So some of what we would normally have.
Any other questions from the council?
Good. Thank you.
Reagan? Public comments?
Let me step away.
Thank you, Reagan.
We only have 2 meetings because you requested it.
That's a disappointment, because I think it's one of the most important things that the council does, is to create this budget. Suzanne Coleman, 225 North May. Reagan is right. This is my 16th budget meeting, and we have 2 budget hearings because my first budget meeting, I was surprised that there wasn't a preliminary budget meeting. So the next year there was a preliminary budget meeting, and I appreciate that. Sounds like the state of our union is strong, according to Mr. Parsons. And it was last year, as Ms. Clement pointed out, we did not suffer the way we anticipated suffering because of the pandemic. Reagan also mentioned that in the budget, the income, the increase in proposed fees from Parks and Rec is a very small percentage of our budget. But it affects some very important segments of our community. And I'm very much opposed to the increase in the facilities rental and the shelter rentals. And I want to pass this out to you. 2 documents I want to pass out. One is just a little spreadsheet with the facility rentals fees. And the other is, it's a School of Government document called North Carolina's Most Regressive Taxes. I have one for BJ. If you could take one of these and pass it.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
And take one of these and pass it down. Thank you.
Just so confusing. Did you give him one?
I did.
Okay. So, as you can see, if you look at the spreadsheet, the proposed increase for the Douglas Center, which is used widely by the residents of West Southern Pines, increased 71%. And on the weekends, 50%. And then the train house, 71% and 50%. And the train station, which has far fewer amenities and seats only a third of what the Douglas Center and the train house seats, has an 11% increase for weekdays and 20% on weekends. Fred Walden is going to roll over in his grave if you approve these proposals, because he fought every year to keep those fees low for the community. And in view of how well we're doing and how much we're putting into salary increases and other projects, it would seem that because this is such a small revenue stream for the town, that they could retain the existing fees. So down below this, on this matrix, is the Pinehurst median income. Well, I say this because Cindy, when she was presenting that spreadsheet at the work session, and she said that they had checked with other communities, but she specifically identified Pinehurst in a footnote. And so I looked up the 2020 census information for Pinehurst, and the median income is $52,247, and they've got a poverty rate of 4%, where Southern Pines has a median income of $42,744, but a poverty rate of 13%. And I think that's another reason why we should maintain the existing fee schedule for these three facilities. Which leads me to the recycling fee. And this article about North Carolina's most regressive taxes, and I just want to read you the conclusion, and I hope that you'll read the article. It says, this is about flat taxes and tax fairness, and recycling is a flat tax. It's one of those, it's a utility, and it's unmetered, so whether people use it or don't use it, or fill up half a bin or not, they're paying the same amount of money. And so the conclusion is, local governments are attracted to flat taxes because they bring in additional revenues without an increase in property tax rates. Now, this is a common political strategy for local governments. It's great to be able to, you'll see the headline in the pilot, Southern Pines maintains, 40 cents on the $100 tax rate. However, public revenue sources have to be judged not solely by how much revenue they raise and how politically expedient they are, but also by how equitably they distribute the costs of providing public services among the people of the community. Financing services through the property tax means that people pay according to the value of the property they own, and because higher income taxpayers tend to own more property, they pay more than lower income taxpayers. Financing services through a flat tax on households means that taxpayers who own modest homes or mobile homes pay the same amount as taxpayers who own mansions. That outcome violates the tax fairness principle that taxes to support public services benefiting everybody should be imposed according to taxpayers' ability to pay. A flat tax is North Carolina's most regressive kind of tax. Now, I am particularly sensitive to this issue. I grew up with a single mom who worked nights as a waitress, 5 and 6 nights a week. Sometimes she did split shifts. There were 6 children under the age of 13. We took care of ourselves. Today, I think Child Protective Services would come in and take us away from my mother. She tried to feed us on $50 a week, and I can remember one winter, we had a gas furnace and we had gas stove, and one winter, she couldn't pay the bill. and the gas man came to turn our meter off. I watched my mother get on her knees to beg the gas man to not turn the gas off, but he did. And so she cooked our meals in an electric percolator, and she heated the water for our baths in that electric percolator. And that went on for almost a month. So we have people in this community. $5 doesn't sound like much. $4.75 doesn't sound like much. But to people that are on a fixed income or struggling or have a lot of children or have a $7.50 an hour wage, it makes a difference. It makes a difference. And so we're getting this wonderful windfall from ARPA. And in the final rules for ARPA that were just printed out finally, it's a 25-page document. The number one objective of the funding is to fight the pandemic and support families and businesses struggling with its public health and economic impacts. Economic impacts. And we're getting $4.7 million. There has to be a way for us to be sensitive to the residents of our community who deserve our support because, and I would say West Southern Pines was hit harder by this pandemic. There were lots of lost jobs. And I think that we deserve to spend some of that money or minimize the impacts that we have with these fees where we can, especially where you have an unmetered utility like recycling. And then you also take the glass away, so that's another whole issue. But so I'm here to ask you to read this article, to support the current fee schedule for our facilities and our shelters, and to think very carefully about these regressive taxes like recycling when you go to vote in June. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Anyone else? Public comments? Okay, are you back up?
Well, if there is no one else, I do just want to offer for clarification, and I
Okay.
think council's aware of it, and in full disclosure, I understand Ms. Coleman's reference to it as a recycling fee, because for many years, that's how it was discussed. This is in fact a solid waste fee now. As council's fully aware, we could in fact, well, if we got rid of recycling altogether, we'd either be covering more than 60% with this same fee, or we may be able to drop this fee if you wanted to continue to cover just 60%. Recycling has become that, and it's not what it was at one time. But it is not a recycling fee. It is based on solid waste and the contract, both the collection and the disposal. And this is as you've seen from the lengthy memos that Jessica's been good to put together, this is a far different discussion than it was a decade or 15 years ago. There was a time that we could take yard waste to Moore County and it didn't cost a dime, and it's costing a lot just in tonnage now. As one example, there was a time that recycling practically paid for itself. It costs more to dump recycling now than it does waste. So again, I will not disagree the point regarding regressivity. Your alternative is to always look at the tax rate and make up the money that way. And I will say, relative to the ARPA funding, and I've been very adamant about this from day one, and council can always choose to do what it wishes, but something like supplementing a monthly fee is not sustainable. These are one-time dollars. They should go to one-time costs and projects and capital. It's simply, if you go a year and don't do anything with this fee and eat up the $400,000 or $500,000 that will cost you to do, how many years can you really sustain that and what has been accomplished? So I would caution against simply using ARPA funds to do that sort of thing. But beyond that, she's absolutely correct about Mr. Walden. It's why these fees haven't been changed in 20 years, in large part. But I think Cindy's also been running some data that it's not necessarily the community using a lot of these facilities either. So I don't know. I don't know how much of an impact an increase on something that isn't being used in the first place will ultimately have. That's all I have.
Thank you.
So on the, excuse me, on the facilities, do we have a resident versus non-resident fee?
There is a non-resident. And when I say the community, I know there's been a lot of discussion about this
Right,
building.
no,
and-
I know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. Any-
Parsons.
Any other? With that, I need a motion. Sorry? I don't have a motion on record. Oh, I did. I think he made it and Taylor seconded. Yeah, we had 2 seconds. We have 4.
I did make that motion.
And I don't do all that, so yeah. Okay, so with that being said, I need a motion to close.
I so move.
I'll second.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye. We will vote for approval, obviously, in June. So that's another one of those open and closes that we don't go any further. Now, we're looking at the action items. Find my notes. Action items. AR 0922, this is the Pinehurst Surgical Center that Jennifer Hunt had presented last time. We had an architectural compliance permit. Questions were asked and answered. I don't know if you need any more discussion about that with you all? No. Yes, I'm thrilled to death, as I'd have to hit you with this, and it's really awkward. It's your lucky day. Any public comments? Some of you over here. Hearing none, I need a motion to approve AR 0922.
I'll jump in. Since I missed the work session.
Second.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye. The next one is AR 1122, Morganton Park South out parcel. Again, we met with Barry Bird. We had discussion. I don't know if you all want to have any public comments about that. If not, I'm looking to a motion to approve that also.
To clarify, there were a lot of issues that were, I guess, not clear. And
An architectural review type stuff, I
Okay.
think.
so everything that was unclear, we feel like we got through all of it. Okay.
If I may, real quick.
Please.
I appreciate the noticing that detail. What happened was, at the time the staff report was generated, we did request a bunch of additional information, and we hadn't gotten anything. We usually request that pretty early on, and it just doesn't come. So we have a cutoff date for our staff reports, and at that time, we're forced to say, we don't know the answer to this. In this particular case, about a day before the actual agenda meeting, the applicant submitted all the
Yeah.
Yeah,
materials.
I thought
So
Jennifer-
At the hearing, Jennifer was able to say, we understand
Clear,
this now, we
yeah.
understand this now. And so it's essentially, it's approved as submitted and as the additional material was submitted at the agenda. So thank you.
Yep. And then I will say for the record that for some reason, I still feel like they're trying to fit a circle in a square hole on this project. It just doesn't seem like it fits the way that it should, but if it fits our code, then that's not my prerogative to judge it.
There's the dilemma.
Yeah.
Building half the building into the dirt.
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking for a motion.
Yeah, the drive-through.
Let's say I'll move that we approve AR-11-22.
Looking for a second.
Go ahead. Can we condition it upon,
I don't think we can condition it at this stage. I think that that's
This is
things we
just
can
an
discuss
architecture
later.
review.
So without reason to not approve it, then I will second the motion.
Okay. Second, so pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Reluctantly, aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
C, we're changing our municipal elections. We had a discussion on that. Any public comments on that one? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion.
So moved. Sorry.
Okay, now we got to go back to many hours ago. The adoption of the MSD, we talked about that he presented it, and now, remember, it's a two-stage situation, so I need a motion to approve what was presented earlier tonight.
Even approve, or are we waiting just for the second?
Yeah, no, you actually, it's odd,
We do
believe
have to
me.
approve it and
Yeah,
then
you-
approve it
You do
again?
need to approve it, and then you'll approve it again next month to make it.
Then you really approve it.
Have an actual number on,
That's the reimbursement agreement. All this does is
This is
create
just-
the taxing district.
no rate on this yet either. It's all later. Okay. All right. So I will move to, never mind. Go for it.
Great, I'll move to approve the MSD 01-22 as presented.
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda, A through E. I need one motion to approve all unless you have any questions about what's in front of us.
Motion to approve our consent agenda.
Second.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye. I need a motion to adjourn. Lou, second.
Aye, aye.
Say
Aye, sorry.
We stand adjourned.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, Tess left us. She'd gotten a lot together. Yeah, she was here just a minute ago, yeah.
This is how I get to the
all
GIS
these.
under our light.
Not even kidding. Oh, not even kidding. I love all these. It's my jam.
They're doing their thing.
I'm telling you,
Jessica, the graphic.
it's my jam.